Chapter 39:22. Su Fu sighed in her heart. She was afraid that her son would follow in his father's footsteps. Mubai was mature, but he was not as experienced as Mulin. This was also the reason why Yi Jinggang let his boss go into politics instead of Mubai. Su Fu's heart raced, but she still maintained a calm smile on her face. She asked Wen Yuan to eat, then turned around to pack a set of clothes and a set of pajamas for Yi Hui. Xiangnan said excitedly that he wanted Yi Hui to wear the piggy's shoes. It was so ceremonial. Su Fu knew that Wen Yuan probably wouldn't come home tonight. She didn't say anything and even prepared snacks for the two kids. Wen Yuan and Bai Xueli were his two wives. Bai Xueli was closer to her. Although she wasn't particularly considerate, she was still cute. Wen Yuan's personality was like another Su Fu. In Su Fu's eyes they were friends, but she was his daughter-in-law after all. There were some things that couldn't be said. After sending them to the car, Wen Yuan turned around and said, "Mom, I'll send Yi Hui back after I send Xiangnan to school tomorrow." Su Fu was very understanding. "In the future, if you want to bring her out to play, you can come anytime. I'll always be home." Wen Yuan was a little touched. She knew that Su Fu had noticed something, but she couldn't say it. His thoughtfulness touched her. Even her own mother wasn't as considerate as Su Fu. Wen Yuan started the car and glanced at the two kids behind from the rearview mirror. Xiangnan and Yi Hui were very happy, especially when Xiangnan carried Yi Hui on his lap and took care of her like a little adult. They felt very good as siblings. Apart from being siblings, Xiangnan also had Yi Hui's blood on him. While Wen Yuan was driving, Su Fu called Yi Mubai. "Mubai, what's going on between you and Wen Yuan?" "Nothing." Yi Mubai sat in the living room with a glass of red wine in his hand. He rubbed his forehead with the other hand. He had a headache. "Mom, why do you ask?" Su Fu's voice was always gentle. He said softly, "When Yuan came and took Yi Hui away." "What?" Yi Mubai sat up straight and asked in disbelief, "What does Wen Yuan want to do?" Su Fu was slightly angry. "She won't do anything. She said she would send Yi Hui back tomorrow morning." "Oh, that's good." Yi Mubai leaned back and said in a low voice, "Mom, there's nothing between us." Su Fu was silent for a while before saying, "Mubai, Mom knows that you're powerful and capable now. As your mother, I'm proud of you. But as your wife, Wen Yuan won't feel comfortable seeing your scandals. You know that she has a knot in her heart. If you try to provoke her in this way, it will only make her feel colder. Mubai, think about it carefully. Don't throw her away. Wen Yuan is a very good woman, but you just don't understand her." With that, Su Fu hung up the phone and sighed again. Hao Yun poured her a cup of tea and put his arm around her shoulders. "Don't worry. They will always have feelings for each other." Mubai's feelings came too late and in the wrong way. Su Fu said in a low voice, "I used to stay at home all day like Wen Yuan. Later on, when I went out, I realized that the world is very high and the world is very wide. I've lived in vain in the past. But Mubai feels that it's better for Wen Yuan to stay at home. I know what he's thinking. He doesn't want Wen Yuan to come into contact with the outside world, mainly because of Kong Qiao. If Wen Yuan really retaliates one day and goes out, that will be the start of the battle between the husband and wife. It's good to make a fuss. Otherwise, it will be like the movement of the Earth's crust. If you don't let him vent, he will erupt like a volcano," Hao Yun said with a smile. Su Fu rolled her eyes at him. "You're getting better and better at talking nonsense." The old couple supported her upstairs to sleep. Before they fell asleep, Su Fu touched his side and said, "I'm really not used to not having little Yi Hui." Hao Yun laughed and said, "You're addicted to it." "You don't like it?" Su Fu rolled her eyes at him. "You wake up more at night than I do. You think I don't know that?" After she said that, Hao Yun was silent. He did not speak for a while. Su Fu tugged at his pajamas and asked, "What's wrong?" He lowered his head and looked at his wife. Then, with a little guilt, he said, "If I had looked for you earlier, we might have had a child. She would be as cute as Yi Hui." Su Fu leaned into his arms and murmured, "It's enough for me to have you. You see, we still have a lot of children." Xiang'an. The night slowly got late. They spoke intermittently. They were sleepy. End of chapter. Chapter 39-23. For Yi Xiangnan and Yi Hui, the night had just begun. When Yuan took them to the Four Seasons Hotel and booked a presidential suite. The fried chicken was also delivered, and then it was a pajama party for the two children. When the theme room was pushed open, little Yi Hui immediately threw herself on the soft big bed and rolled around. Xiangnan also rubbed his hands excitedly. After settling them down, when Yuan closed the door and let them play by themselves, she went to the hall outside. Every presidential suite in the Four Seasons Hotel had $1 million piano. Of course, the room was not cheap, more than 100,000 yuan a night. Of course, when Yuan could afford it, she could always have tens of millions of yuan in her card. This was the advantage of being Mrs. Knight. She sat in front of the piano, slowly opened the lid, put her 10 fingers on it, and gently touched it. The sweet music poured out, which was indescribably pleasant. When Yuan sat up straight and played A Starry Sky from memory. She sat in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, looking at the starry sky outside and playing slowly. She felt very beautiful. She liked this occasional disorderly. Without Yi Mubai, no one would call her Mrs. Knight. She could do what she liked, and she would not be looked at while playing the piano, wondering if she was thinking about Kong Qiao. He didn't understand her, and he never tried to understand her. He said that she loved him, but she couldn't feel it. She only felt possession. When Yuan had always been an independent individual, she didn't like this feeling. She didn't like being controlled. She had endured for 2 years before she had tonight. She played for 2 hours and enjoyed herself. The two children were also tired. She went to take care of them and fell asleep. One big and one small lay in bed, their little faces full of satisfaction. At this time, when Yuan remembered that Xiangnan hadn't done his homework, she hesitated for a moment and decided to be willful for once. After kissing the two little guys, she went back to the master bedroom and took a bath. The bathtub in the 5-star presidential suite was unbelievably luxurious, and there was a wine cabinet next to it. When Yuan rarely indulged, but tonight she wanted to indulge. She poured herself a glass of red wine, shook it gently and took a sip. She drank a few glasses in a row. In the middle of the night, there was a light in the corner of her eyes. His phone was ringing. From the ringtone, it should be Yi Mubai, but when Yuan didn't want to pick up his call. She did not want to hear his voice, nor did she want to see him. She drank one glass after another willfully, not thinking of tomorrow, not thinking of the future. He didn't want to think about Yi Mubai either. On the other side, Yi Mubai stood quietly in front of the French window of the villa. He was surrounded by silence. He did not know how he and Wen Yuan had ended up like this. Was it wrong that he wanted her to love him? She doesn't care about his scandals. All she cares about is whether or not she can go out to work. Isn't it good to have a nice night at home? He was willing to give her everything as long as she stayed at home and stayed by his side. He had been standing there the whole time and hadn't eaten anything. A servant came over and said softly, "Sir, you haven't eaten yet. Do you want to start eating?" "No need," he said indifferently. After a long time, the servants behind him did not make a sound. He turned around and asked, "What's wrong?" The servant hesitated. "Sir, Madam used to wait for you at home for dinner." Then, as she waited, she stopped waiting, because she couldn't wait. While Wen Yuan was waiting for Yi Mubai, he was socializing. He was rolling around in the colorful entertainment industry, playing all kinds of games for power and money. End of this chapter. Chapter 39-24. But he had never betrayed Wen Yuan or betrayed their marriage. Between him and Wen Yuan, it was as if they had entered a vicious circle. He could no longer give Wen Yuan the life that she yearned for, and she did not want everything that he had given her. It was actually very boring for a married couple to reach this point, but he did not want to give up. Wen Yuan, on the other hand, wanted to walk out, but she had never found a good opportunity. Was she finally going to explode now? Yi Mubai kept standing there until late at night. He called her again, but she still did not answer. She must have done it on purpose. She did not want to answer his call. He asked Hina to find out which hotel she was staying at. It was already midnight. Hina crawled out of bed to serve him. Finally, she found out that it was the Four Seasons Hotel. Hina said, "Mrs. Yi got a presidential suite there, the kind with a theme room." Yi Mubai said mildly, "Got it." He put away his phone and turned to walk into the master bedroom. He had not entered the master bedroom for many days. The bedroom was European style, and the decoration was according to Wen Yuan's preferences. She had also picked out the decorations one by one. He was too busy to spend time on these small things. Yi Mubai sat on the sofa and put his hand on his forehead, feeling a little headache. He thought about his mother's words for a long time, and then let out a long breath. She was not there, so he slept in the master bedroom. The pillow was filled with Wen Yuan's unique scent, faint but extremely seductive. He hugged the pillow that belonged to her in his arms impatiently, thinking that he had not hugged her for a week. Early in the morning at the Four Seasons Hotel, when Yuan had slept, Xiangnan went to school at 8 o'clock, and she did not wake up until 8:30. When she woke up, she saw a message on her phone. It was from Xiangnan's teacher. She asked politely why Yi Xiangnan had not gone to school yet, and whether he was sick or something. When Yuan had to choose her words carefully and said that she was late with her homework. Then she remembered that Xiangnan had not finished his homework, and called out to Shin Yin again. She patted her head and hurriedly woke Xiangnan and Yi Hui up. When the children were brushing their teeth, she called for breakfast. It was already 9 o'clock when she went out. When the door opened, Yi Mubai stood at the door. She was stunned for a moment. Yi Mubai saw the piano in front of the French window at first glance. He looked at it quietly and said calmly, "The teacher at school said that Xiangnan hasn't gone to school yet. He said that he finished his homework late." When Yuan was a little embarrassed and didn't know how to reply. He walked in and picked up Yi Hui, kissed her, and then patted Xiangnan's head. "Go to school, Yi Xiangnan. This is the only and the last time." Xiangnan hung his head dejectedly. "Yes, Dad." Wen Yuan wanted to say something, but his gaze was a little stern as he glanced over. He better finish his homework. Xiangnan lowered his head even more. "Dad, I didn't write it." He looked at his son and didn't criticize him. He only said mildly, "Explain it to the teacher yourself later, okay?" "Oh," Xiangnan replied obediently. Yi Mubai personally drove him to school. He focused on driving, and when Yuan and the two children sat behind him, Mu Shang's car stopped at the school gate. Xiangnan carried his little school bag and still looked dejected. "Bye, Mom and Dad." Then he went over and kissed his sister. Little Xiangnan thought that he didn't regret it. He was very happy last night. People always had to pay a price for their actions. This price was to write 10 times as punishment. End of chapter. Chapter 39-25. Half an hour later, Yi Mubai sent Xiangnan to school. He got out of the car and carried Xiangnan in. Yi Xiangnan looked at his father with his eyes wide open. "Daddy, I'll talk to you tonight. Go to class now." "Yi Xiangnan, you're a boy. Do you understand what I mean? Whose fault is it that you didn't do your homework?" He looked at his son seriously. Yi Xiangnan opened his little mouth and then said gloomily, "It's my own fault. It has nothing to do with Mommy." Yi Mubai reached out and touched his son's hair. "At least you still have some backbone. Go in and get a meal tonight. Got it, boy?" "I know. Don't scream in pain and don't cry." Xiangnan sniffled. "Bye, Daddy." Yi Xiangnan trotted in. Yi Mubai looked at him for a while before getting in the car. He hadn't seen Yi Hui for a few days. He opened the door of the back seat and carried Yi Hui out. He kissed her and said, "I'll take you back to Grandma's house." Yi Hui opened her eyes wide. "I want to go home." Although Grandma was very good and she liked her a lot, she wanted to be with her parents more. Yi Mubai was stunned for a moment but still agreed. "Okay, Daddy, call Grandma and tell her that we'll go after a while, okay?" Little Yi Hui nodded happily. Yi Mubai put her back in the seat and looked at Wen Yuan deeply. Wen Yuan licked his lower lip. "Take me to the hotel. My car is there." He ignored her and closed the car door. Wen Yuan was a little annoyed. It wasn't until he got in the car and fastened his seatbelt that he said lightly, "I'll ask the driver to drive back. Give the car key to old Zhao." Wen Yuan didn't object anymore. Letting Xiangnan be late and not do her homework was enough to send her to the 18th level of hell. It was as if she had always been a bad mother. Wen Yuan didn't say anything. He drove the car back to the villa. He hadn't seen Yi Hui for a long time, so he didn't go to the company. He just played with Yi Hui. When Yi Hui was tired, she would lie on his body and sleep. Yi Mubai carried the little fellow to the children's room and watched her quietly for a while before returning to the master bedroom. Wen Yuan was leaning against the sofa in front of the French window, reading a book. He walked in and slowly unbuttoned his shirt, revealing his tan skin. Before Wen Yuan could react, he reached out and pulled her up into his arms. His voice was hoarse as he said, "You reek of alcohol. Go wash it off. It's none of your business." She placed her hands on his shoulders and pushed him away, but not only did she not push him away, they both fell onto the sofa. He bent his legs and trapped her under him. "Yi Mubai, are you going to be rough with me again?" She turned her head, her eyes a little red. He whispered beside her ear, "What did you do last night? Can you tell me?" She didn't want to talk about it. Yi Mubai raised her eyes and stared at her for a while. She got up slightly and began to unbutton her shirt. Wen Yuan buried his face in the pillow and said in a trembling voice, "Yi Mubai, don't do this to me." As he unbuttoned his shirt, he whispered, "You're my wife. Why can't I touch you?" His hand had just touched Wen Yuan's shoulder when she flinched and buried her face deeper. "Go to bed." She still gave in because she was no match for him. It was useless for her to resist. He would only make her cry more forcefully and rudely. But now, he wanted to do it with her on the sofa and make her cry. He had deliberately made her naked, but he was neat and tidy. It was even more shameful this way. Wen Yuan said no, but he had already pressed down on her. At that moment, she burst into tears. They hadn't been together for many days, so he was very anxious. He didn't torture her slowly like he usually did, but he wasn't rough either. He wouldn't hurt her too much, so Wen Yuan buried his face in his hands and cried. Yi Mubai's voice was hoarse. "Don't cry, okay?" She was still crying. Her hair covered half her face and the tip of her nose was red from crying. His heart softened a little. It was an incredible feeling. He reached out to brush her hair aside and kissed her nose. Then, he kissed her red lips for a long time before he murmured, "Did I make you uncomfortable?" She turned her face away. Her side profile was very attractive. Her red lips parted slightly and her voice was hoarse and seductive. "I don't want to talk to you." "Then who do you want to talk to, okay?" He hugged her slender body and was very satisfied with what he was hugging. Wen Yuan bit her lip and didn't say a word. She quietly endured him. Then, she cried again. Why was he not okay? Yi Mubai pressed his lips against her ear and said in a low voice, "Why don't you scream?" "Wen Yuan, I like to hear you scream, okay?" She felt ashamed. She was being tortured by her husband on the sofa in the bedroom during the day. Especially when Yi Hui was still at home. He probably sensed her thoughts and chuckled. "Yi Hui is asleep. She won't hear you even if you scream a little louder." Wen Yuan finally opened her eyes and was stunned. His expression was very demonic. He kissed her and said expressionlessly, "Do it again," when Yuan was lying on her stomach with her head buried in the pillow. She was still crying softly. He covered her back and bit the soft flesh behind her ear. "It's been so many days. Wen Yuan, did you miss me, okay?" She didn't say a word, so he didn't let her go and started to torture her again. He said warmly, "But I did miss you. Do you feel it?" He was thinking about Yuan. When Yuan only felt ashamed. From noon until the sky was dark, Yi Mubai finally let her go. End of chapter. Chapter 39-26. On the luxurious bed, Yi Mubai got up and tidied up his clothes. Shung on his back. "Clean up and come out for dinner later." After he left, when Yuan was still sprawled on the soft, snow-white bed. She bit on the pillow, which had long been bitten badly. The bedroom was filled with warmth and it hurt to even move her body. She knew that this was Yi Mubai's punishment for her disorderly behavior last night. With the two children at home, Wen Yuan couldn't lie down no matter what. Moreover, there were marks everywhere in the room. She still had to clean it up. She propped herself up, took a shower and tidied up the bedroom. The other places were still fine except for the bed and the sofa, which she couldn't look at anymore. She changed the bedsheets on the bed and carefully scrubbed the sofa with a small brush before drying it with a hairdryer. Yi Mubai pushed the door open and saw Wen Yuan drying the sofa. He frowned. Just let the servants do it. He closed the door after saying that for her sake. Wen Yuan bit her lip. I'm not you. He walked over and stood beside her to take the hairdryer. We're husband and wife. It's normal to do it on the sofa occasionally. If you really can't put it down, you can call a professional to come and clean it. She looked down. There's no need for others to see. Yi Mubai put the hairdryer away and looked at her. There's no need to be so concerned. It's normal for other couples. Really? But they did it willingly. Wen Yuan smiled. Let's go eat. Her smile was very faint. Yi Mubai wanted to grab her hand. She shook it off. I'm very tired. I don't want to pester you anymore. He stared at her and smiled faintly. I don't have time to pester you at night. Yi Xiangnan didn't do his homework and played outside until midnight. What do you think I'll do to your son? As he said that, he held her delicate chin and said softly, Xiangnan is a man. He has to be punished for his mistakes. After he finished speaking, he let go of her and turned to leave. Wen Yuan hurriedly grabbed his clothes and said in a low and hoarse voice, Yi Mubai, this has nothing to do with Xiangnan. Don't hit him. Yi Mubai was very strict with Xiangnan. If he made a mistake, he would be punished by the family law. He had beaten Xiangnan once before with a rattan cane. That time, Xiangnan almost lost his breath. Xiangnan's body was so weak, how could he withstand this? Wen Yuan's body was still hurting, but she immediately ran over and hugged him from behind. Yi Mubai, I beg you, don't hit him. It's my fault. I shouldn't have taken him out, and I shouldn't have let him eat fried chicken. If you want to hit someone, hit me. He tilted his head and chuckled softly. Wen Yuan, what does it matter if I hit you? Wen Yuan hugged him tightly and refused to let go. Whenever she thought of how Xiangnan had been beaten up, she would feel so heartache that she couldn't breathe. She would feel especially terrible and despicable. She said despicably, Mubai, don't hit him. My heart will ache. He stood there without moving, and his voice was also very faint. Wen Yuan, why don't you feel sorry for me? She was a little dazed. You have everything. He turned around and pressed his hand gently on her shoulder, but he didn't answer her question. I'm not satisfied. Wen Yuan, you know what I want. I want a normal wife, not a woman who can't sleep in the middle of the night and goes to the study to think about someone else. I want a woman who can treat me sincerely, and not a woman who is unwilling to sleep every time we have sex. You understand, yeah? End of chapter. Chapter 39:27. Wen Yuan stared at her blankly. After a long time, he murmured, Yi Mubai, is this what you want? He didn't speak. She continued, as long as I do what you said you wanted, you won't hit Xiangnan, right? He still didn't speak and just lit a cigarette. Wen Yuan took a step back and walked slowly into the study. After a while, he came out with a box. She called the servant and said softly, throw these away. The servant hesitated, and Wen Yuan said again, there's no need for these. Throw them away. The servant went to throw them away. Wen Yuan stood for a while and turned back. She walked up to him and stood still. She said in a very low voice, other things I'll... Before she could finish speaking, he grabbed her wrist and lifted her up. Wen Yuan, have you thought it through? She laughed lightly. Yi Mubai, do I have a choice? You always use sex to solve your problems, and what else can I do other than obey? Divorce? She shook her head. Will you give Xiangnan and Yi Hui to me? He looked at her with a very deep and meaningful expression. He said, Wen Yuan, you're very smart. His slender and cold fingers gently caressed her red lips, and his voice was also very faint. I'll wait for your performance tonight. She turned her face away, unwilling to be touched by him. He smiled and didn't mind. He walked out first to eat. Wen Yuan composed himself in the bedroom before walking out. Xiangnan and Yi Hui were sitting at the dining table. Xiangnan's face was a little pale. He was probably a little scared because he was going to be punished. Wen Yuan couldn't bear to see him like this. He picked up a piece of pork rib and gave it to him. He said very gently, Mom and Dad have talked about it. They won't hit you anymore. Xiangnan was a little surprised because his father had never changed his decision, especially when it came to principles. Thus, he shifted his gaze to Yi Mubai, his eyes full of desire. Yi Mubai's tone was very faint. Your mother pleaded for mercy. Don't do it again. Yi Xiangnan finally relaxed. He rubbed his chest as if he had just survived a disaster and let out a long breath. After Yi Mubai finished speaking, he gave Wen Yuan a meaningful look. Wen Yuan pretended not to see anything and ate quietly. Yi Mubai didn't say anything. He took care of the two kids and ate together. Xiangnan was especially well behaved today. Not only did he eat by himself, but he also took care of his sister. He was indeed a sweet boy. After eating, he brought Yi Fenghui to his room. He even showed her the manga and did his homework. Yi Mubai was satisfied with his son's performance. He went to the study to deal with some matters. When he came back, he watched as Xiangnan finished his homework, took care of little Yi Hui, and went to sleep together. The two little ones were lying side by side. Yi Hui was hugging her brother with her chubby little hands. Her pinkish little fingernails were all pink. Yi Mubai felt warm in his heart just by looking at it. He kissed Xiangnan and said in a low voice, "Don't do this again." Xiangnan was worried. "Dad, will you change your mind?" Yi Mubai smiled. "No." He reached out and pinched the little boy's face. Actually, he loved his son no less than Wen Yuan. It was just that Wen Yuan spent more time with the child than him. He closed the door and turned to the master bedroom. Wen Yuan had taken a bath. He changed into a set of pajamas and sat in front of the dressing table to dry his hair. He recognized that the pajamas she was wearing were the ones he had bought for her. She had never worn them before, but she had put them on tonight. It was obvious that she wanted to please him. End of this chapter. Chapter 39-28. He walked over softly and hugged her shoulders from behind, burying his face in her hair. She had washed her hair and it smelled fresh. His touch caused Wen Yuan's body to tremble slightly. "Wen Yuan, you look scared." He nibbled on her neck with a force that made her want to scream. She closed her eyes. "What do you want?" "What do I want?" His kiss moved over and he held her head with one hand, turning her head to let him kiss her. He kissed her lightly and his voice was even lower. "Do you know what kind of punishment Xiangnan had to go through before?" Wen Yuan didn't want to face it, but he had already picked her up and thrown her onto the soft bed. Wen Yuan lay on her stomach, feeling very embarrassed. He bent over and half knelt on both sides, leaning forward slightly and pressing his lips against her ear. "Should I go first, or should you go first?" Wen Yuan felt that no matter which choice she made, it would be very perverted. She bit the pillow and refused to speak, so he laughed and raised his hand to slap her. He used a lot of force, and soon a red mark appeared. Wen Yuan cried out and buried her face in the pillow. She was very embarrassed to be treated like this by a man. They were both trading stocks, but he could come up with all sorts of tricks to make her feel ashamed. Yi Mubai pressed his lips against her ear, his voice hot. "I wanted to let you go, but you were the one who wanted to dress like this to provoke me." He hit her every time he said a sentence. Wen Yuan cried softly and begged him to stop, but she didn't know that a woman's crying and begging would only make a man's beast jade stronger. And every time he hit her, she would beg softly. The beast blood in Yi Mubai's body was almost ignited. She cried softly and begged him continuously. Yi Mubai pulled her hair gently and turned her around. He couldn't help but go over and kiss her when he saw her messy appearance. After torturing her for the entire afternoon, he was excited again. "You're willing to treat me like this because you miss Nan. That's why you're willing to please me, isn't that right?" His voice was extremely sexy, and his warm breath fell on her neck. "If it wasn't because you miss Nan, you wouldn't wear or do it, isn't that right?" Wen Yuan was folded in his arms, so fragile that it seemed like she would break at any moment. Her black spaghetti strap pajamas fell halfway down, and her black hair spread over her shoulders like seaweed. He leaned close to her ear and whispered, "Kiss me." She was trembling uncontrollably. Even though she was unwilling, she still lifted her face to kiss him. She kissed the corner of his mouth. He wasn't satisfied and directly kissed her on the lips. He was so ferocious as though he wanted to swallow her whole. After kissing for a long time, he finally let her go. He pulled away slightly and said in a low voice, "Kiss downward, him." She had been married to him for a few years and had many affairs, but she still did not know how to do it, because she rarely took the initiative. All she needed to do was lie down and endure, or enjoy. When Yuan was trembling uncontrollably and clumsily followed his instructions, kissing him bit by bit. In the end, she cried. Yi Mubai reached out and pulled her up, hugged her in his arms, and kissed her lips. His voice was very low. "When Yuan, remember, this is my scent." She went to the bathroom and washed herself 3 times, but she still couldn't wash the scent off. Later, she sat on the toilet and cried. She cried very sadly. Yi Mubai appeared at the bathroom door. He had already changed into a bathrobe. He looked at her quietly and reached out to pull her up, pressing her against the sink. When Yuan was stunned, she looked up at him. "Haven't you had enough?" Yi Mubai kissed her and didn't say a word. He just wanted to do it to his heart's content. It wasn't until late at night that he let her go. His voice was also low and husky. "When Yuan, you've starved me for too long." She cried and was very tired. In the end, he carried her back to the master bedroom and cleaned her up. That night, he slept beside her. When Yuan fell asleep, she only heard his voice. "Be good, okay?" Early in the morning, it was already 9 o'clock when Yuan woke up. Her pillow was empty. She was a little absent-minded as she thought about what happened last night. Her face was very hot and ashamed. She calmed herself down and went out. After asking the servants at home, she found out that Yi Mubai had sent Xiangnan himself, and that he had brought Yi Hui to the company. The servant hesitated for a moment. "Sir said to let Madam go to the company. Sir has a meeting in the afternoon, and little Miss wants to take an afternoon nap." When Yuan said mildly that she got it, and then she went back to the bedroom to freshen up. She felt a little complicated. She didn't want to see him. Every time she saw him, she would be reminded of his bad behavior last night. However, when Yuan couldn't leave Yi Hui in his company. After she freshened up, she had breakfast and went to his company. When she arrived, it was almost 10:30. The receptionist saw Wen Yuan, and this time she recognized her. She respectfully sent Xiao Ye's wife to the elevator and said with a smile, "Xiao Ye is waiting for you." Wen Yuan forced a smile and walked into the elevator. End of chapter. Chapter 39-29. When they reached the top floor, Andy stood to welcome them. "Madam, President Yi and little Miss are inside." She paused for a moment. "Madam, you may have forgotten that today is Stars Entertainment's annual meeting." When Yuan had indeed forgotten. Yi Mubai had mentioned it before, but she hadn't been reassured. Moreover, they had quarreled after that. Now that Andy was talking about people, she remembered it and didn't say anything. She pushed the door open and went in. Yi Mubai wasn't working. He was sitting on the sofa with Yi Hui, putting together building blocks. Little Yi Hui was completely focused. Her hair was tied in 2 pigtails and she was wearing a floral dress. She looked very happy and seemed to be very happy to be with her father. When Yuan watched quietly, she suddenly felt that everything that had happened last night was worth it. Although it was a little unbearable, she walked over and Yi Mubai looked up. "You're here," she grunted and sat next to Yi Hui. Yi Hui looked up at her mother and then felt a little homesick. She stopped playing with the building blocks and leaned into Wen Yuan's arms, calling her mother. Wen Yuan hugged her for a while and then put her on his lap to accompany her. Yi Mubai watched for a while and patted Wen Yuan's shoulder. "Stay with her. I'm going to handle some work." He walked over after saying that. Wen Yuan looked at him sideways and was a little surprised at his stamina. He had done it many times yesterday afternoon and night. Wasn't he tired? Wen Yuan didn't know where he got his stamina from. Anyway, she was still very tired and sleepy. She thought of what Andy said and now understood why he didn't leave marks on her neck and arms. Also, why he brought Yi Hui here. She had to come if Yi Hui was here. Wen Yuan was a little lost in thought. Yi Mubai was flipping through some documents behind his desk. Occasionally, he looked up and saw her. He said lightly, "Let's have lunch together. Take Yi Hui to take a nap in the afternoon. The stylist will be here at 4 o'clock." He paused for a moment. Xiangnan and Yi Hui will be there too. Wen Yuan was stunned. Yi Mubai was actually not a high-profile person. Wen Yuan knew why he was doing this. He wanted to make it look like they were a happy family in front of Concho. Wen Yuan said in a low voice, "Can Xiangnan and Yi Hui not attend?" He looked at her. Wen Yuan lowered his eyes. "Yi Mubai, I can give you anything you want, but I don't want my child to be exposed." Yi Mubai smiled. "You're right. Is that a yes?" But Wen Yuan knew that she had to pay the price. After lunch, Yi Hui fell asleep while Wen Yuan splashed water on his face in the bathroom. Yi Mubai appeared in the mirror. One arm easily hooked around her waist. She was forced to straighten up and lean against his chest. Wen Yuan stared at him in the mirror. So did he. He buried his face in her shoulder. "What are you thinking about? How are you going to face Concho tonight?" "Yi Mubai, can you stop mentioning him? I've said that I have nothing to do with him, and I won't have anything to do with him in the future. Why do you always torture me because of someone you have nothing to do with?" Wen Yuan felt that he was biting her. She resisted. "Yi Mubai, don't kiss here. It would leave a mark." As she said this, she heard him chuckle, very low and deep. Then he raised his eyes and looked at her. "I'm afraid that he will see." She wanted to say something, but she felt a pain in her shoulder. She opened her eyes and looked at the decadent look in the mirror. That feeling of despair appeared again. He didn't believe her. He wanted to possess her, no matter what method he used, as long as he was happy. End of chapter. Chapter 39:30. He didn't care about her feelings or what she thought. He persisted in his own way. At this moment, Wen Yuan was very tired. A very dark kiss mark was left on her shoulder. It was very warm. She looked at it quietly and said softly, "Yi Mubai, are you satisfied?" He looked at her in the mirror and adjusted her clothes for her. "Go to sleep. The stylist will be here at 3. At this moment, Wen Yuan really wanted to ignore everything. She just wanted to say a few words to him. "I don't want to live anymore." Was it wrong to not love him anymore? Did she have to be tortured by him like this? She was too tired and wronged as the glamorous Mrs. Yi. She lived in the shadows and couldn't see the sun. She lost herself. She didn't resist anymore. She went to the lounge to sleep and did as he said. Yi Mubai looked at the closed door and frowned. Finally, he clenched his fists. At 3, the chauffeur sent Yi Hui home and the stylist came to do Wen Yuan's hair. Andy had arranged for Dior to send over a 2020 spring gown. It was a ash-colored long chiffon gown with a Dior logo on the shoulder. The dress was very elegant and the layers spread out at the waist, making it seem like her waist was too small. The stylist tied her hair up and paired it with a pair of high heels. The effect was very good. "Mrs. Yi is so beautiful. She looks a little like Sister Chiliang," the stylist praised. Yi Mubai stood at the side and smiled. He saw the kiss mark on her shoulder. The stylist had seen the world and pretended not to see it. She only sighed in her heart. Mrs. Yi was so beautiful that So Yi couldn't bear to let go of her. Yi Mubai reached out and touched it lightly. Then he took out a box from his pocket. There was a red diamond necklace in it. There was a 2-carat diamond hanging on the thin chain. It looked very dazzling. Wen Yuan looked at it quietly. The diamond was very beautiful. It was something that many women wanted. But in her eyes, it was like a shackle that trapped her. He hugged her from behind and rested his chin on her hair. "Do you like it?" Wen Yuan said calmly, "Very beautiful." "Is it only beautiful?" He laughed softly, and then the smile in his eyes slowly disappeared. "It's not as good as the dongju he gave me, is it?" Wen Yuan turned around and said, "Yi Mubai, aren't you being silly? Can you stop mentioning Kong Qiao? Everything you've done is because of Kong Qiao. Do you mind him like this because you love me, or are you afraid that I'll make you a cuckold and ruin your reputation?" She couldn't take it anymore and said, "Actually, there's another way." His expression didn't look too good. He gestured for the others to leave. Then he reached out to hold her chin and leaned forward. "Wen Yuan, don't even think about it. Be Mrs. Yi tonight." He looked at her and then dragged her out. But after 2 steps, he pulled her back and pressed her against the door, kissing her wantonly. His kiss was so deep that Wen Yuan was hurt. She pushed him, but she couldn't move him at all. Her lips were slightly swollen from his kiss, and she was a little absent-minded. Her heart was beating so fast that it almost stopped. Yi Mubai's voice was very hoarse. When Yuan, remember, you're mine. You're Yi Mubai's woman, wife. You'll be mine forever. Her legs were a little weak, and she could barely stand. She leaned against the door and smiled lightly. Is that so? His tone was unhappy. Don't challenge me. Otherwise, you'll know that life won't be easy. End of chapter. Chapter 39-31. The banquet was held at the biggest hotel in B City, G. There was a starry sky in front of the hotel. Yi Mubai appeared with Wen Yuan. He held Wen Yuan's hand and walked straight down the red carpet. Yi Mubai was naturally handsome, and Wen Yuan didn't pale in comparison to him at all. She was dressed in a smoke-colored dress and looked dreamy. Coupled with the fire diamond between her collarbones, she looked dazzling. Previously, many people thought that Yi Mubai's wife rarely showed her face because she wasn't outstanding. But tonight, they saw that she was as beautiful as a fairy and they clearly had a good relationship. Yi Mubai felt that the palms of the people around him were sweating. He had a charming smile on his face as he faced the camera and whispered, "Nervous?" When Yuan didn't say anything. She stood at the back of the red carpet with him for the interview. He was at ease and smiled lazily. Occasionally, he would look at Wen Yuan with deep affection in his eyes. Wen Yuan didn't know if he was tired from acting. She forced a smile and felt a little numb. Yi Mubai had accepted the interview and was going to be photographed with Wen Yuan. It was good enough that they were holding hands, but he pulled her into his arms and put his arm on her shoulder possessively. Wen Yuan wasn't used to it and whispered, "You don't have to get so close. Didn't I say that this is the price you have to pay?" He lowered his voice even more and walked towards the banquet hall with her in his arms. In the banquet hall, the melodious sound of the violin was already playing. The host introduced Yi Mubai and Wen Yuan to all the guests excitedly. "We warmly welcome President Yi and Mrs. Yi." Wen Yuan's body stiffened when she stepped in because she could tell that it was Kong Qiao's violin. Many years ago, she would lean under a tree and Kong Qiao would stand at the window and play this song. It was called Summer Night. At this moment, Wen Yuan felt like she had returned to the past as she listened. She knew that Kong Qiao was telling her not to lose herself. He was telling her that she was Wen Yuan and that she once had a dream. Wen Yuan stopped. She looked at Kong Qiao quietly and her gaze was a little dazed. At this moment, Yi Mubai directly held her hand and went on stage. He began to speak to the audience. His speech was very short, about 2 to 3 minutes. Then, the host, Yi, announced the start of the dance. In that song, Yi Mubai was dancing with Wen Yuan in his arms. The combination of a handsome man and a beautiful woman was especially pleasing to the eyes. Wen Yuan was in his arms and she could feel Kong Qiao's gaze on her. She lowered her eyes, unwilling to look or listen. In a trance, the song ended. She wanted to retreat, but her waist was buckled. She looked up in surprise and saw a pair of deep eyes. His voice was very deep. "Kiss me." Wen Yuan was stunned. "Yi Mubai." He grabbed her waist and forced her towards him. His voice was hoarse and hoarse. "Kiss me." She saw the determination in his eyes, so she bit her lip, tiptoed over, and kissed him lightly on the lips. However, her waist was immediately held down, and she had nowhere to retreat. She muttered absent-mindedly, "Yi Mubai." The two of them were very close. Wen Yuan slowly moved her lips over and gently touched his lips. She thought it was just a light kiss, but just as she was about to move away, he suddenly grabbed the back of her head and kissed her lips fiercely. Translator, King Bao editor, Dark Gem. Everyone was stunned. It was a deep kiss. And it was in public. Xiao Yi kissed his own wife in public. It was very shameful. Wen Yuan's body froze in his arms. She opened her eyes and looked at him. He was the same. End of chapter. Chapter 39-32. Kong Qiao quietly watched as Yi Mubai kissed Wen Yuan. He watched as the girl he had loved for so many years lay in the arms of another man. The strings snapped and the music stopped. The scene was silent, only Yi Mubai's slight panting and Wen Yuan's embarrassed look could be heard. She looked up at him, forced to look at him. Yi Mubai's fingers gently stroked her face, his voice extremely hoarse. "I want to take you away now." His voice was particularly low, imbued with Wen Yuan's familiar desire. And she couldn't resist. He would have to go to socialize eventually. Wen Yuan didn't like to be in the limelight, even though she was the hostess of the scene. She sat alone on the sofa on the balcony, holding a glass of red wine in her hand, looking out into the dark night. The building was very tall, and from here, it looked very far out. Neon lights were flashing everywhere, looking very beautiful, just like Kong Qiao's summer night. Wen Yuan looked at it quietly, feeling very lonely. She didn't know when Kong Qiao appeared behind her, holding a glass of red wine in his hand, his figure reflected on the glass opposite. When Yuan didn't turn around, she only asked softly, "Why did you accept this activity?" Kong Qiao walked to her side, but didn't sit down. He lowered his eyes. "Maybe I didn't want to give up." When Yuan's voice was indifferent. "What about now?" Kong Qiao lowered his eyes, his voice was also low. "When Yuan, I only want you to be happy, no matter who you are with." She looked up at Kong Qiao, suddenly feeling a little willful, or perhaps it could be said that she was resisting Yi Mubai. "Kong Qiao, I want to play the piano." She looked at him, her eyes seemed to be filled with countless stars. Kong Qiao smiled slightly. He said yes. Because he could see that she was unhappy. 5 minutes later, when Yuan sat in front of the piano in front of the French window, Kong Qiao set up the violin beside her. He looked down at her, his gaze confirming the other party's intentions. She played Ode to Joy. She hadn't finished it for a long time, she couldn't even remember the tune clearly, but when Yuan played it casually, even if she played it wrong, she didn't care. Because she was very happy, Concho accompanied her at the side, playing the violin to harmonize with her. When she made a mistake, he would make a mistake as well. One in front and one behind, it was like a chase, strangely in harmony. In the hall, the guests who were originally in 2s and 3s were slowly attracted to the stage. It was the most splendid ensemble they had ever seen. It would not be an exaggeration to describe it as incisively and vividly. Madame Yi on the stage was as dazzling as a fairy. Yi Mubai held onto her wine glass and stared at Wen Yuan, who was on the stage. She looked very happy. She had never been so relaxed before. He finally saw the stars in her eyes. And this was the happiness brought to her by another man. At this moment, she probably didn't know how beautiful she was. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the sky was filled with stars. Her clothes fluttered in the wind, as though she could fly away at any moment, as though he couldn't catch her. He had been with her for so long. Maybe he had fallen in love with her, but at this moment, Yi Mubai felt his heart move for the first time. Her side profile was very beautiful. It was a very standard oval face, very gentle. The way she played the piano was elegant and lively, and her eyes were full of little stars. Yi Mubai felt that at this moment, he was a little drunk, and all this was because of his wife. He looked at her quietly until she finished the last note. He stepped forward and stood beside her, leaning over and kissing her. At the end of this chapter. Chapter 39-33. A light kiss landed on her forehead. His voice was very hoarse. "You play really well." When Yuan's fingers were still on the piano keys. She was surrounded by Yi Mubai's aura. She was a little dazed because he actually wasn't angry. Yi Mubai actually wasn't angry? When Yuan's voice was very soft. Really? He bent down and actually sat next to her. He tilted his head and looked at her. "I'll play a song with you, When Yuan was surprised. "You know how to play too?" He laughed. Actually, with a family like theirs, there was nothing they couldn't do. They would always dabble in music when they were young. It was just that they didn't play it much later on. While they were talking, Kan Xiao quietly left. Yi Mubai continued to speak. "Xia Yi, this song is not bad." As he spoke, he had already started the prelude. When Yuan had no choice but to play with him. She saw Kan Xiao leave from the corner of her eye. She didn't say anything. Maybe this was good for him. Yi Mubai played surprisingly well. His fingers were slender and beautiful. They were very pleasing to the eye. When Yuan looked at his fingers and suddenly remembered something. Her face heated up and she played a few wrong notes. Yi Mubai tilted his head and looked at her. He smiled lightly. Wen Yuan, what are you thinking about? Nothing. She answered very quickly, which made people suspicious. Yi Mubai smiled and didn't say anything else. He just continued to play. He really played very well. He was so good that Wen Yuan felt that he was guiding her. He was so good that she felt embarrassed to go out and play the piano for a living since he played so well as an amateur. He was simply all-rounder. After the song was finished, he tilted his head to look at her. Did she still want it? He asked with a smile. Wen Yuan couldn't refuse. That night, Xiao Yi put aside all his business and focused on accompanying his Madam Yi. They played the piano for the whole night, and then the scene of Wen Yuan and Kong Qiao playing the piano together, and Yi Mubai playing the piano together, quickly became a hot topic on the Elven national goddess of night. Those two videos simply blew up Wen Yuan's beauty. The most discussed topic below was whether the goddess was more compatible with Kong Qiao or the former movie king. But the goddess's identity soon came out. It was the movie king's wife, Wen Yuan. Yi Mubai was in the car when he got to the trending topic. In less than half an hour, his former fans and Kong Qiao's fans had pushed him to the top of the trending topic. He leaned against the back seat of the car and gently scrolled through the comments. Some of the comments said that Wen Yuan and Kong Qiao were a couple, while others said that Wen Yuan and Kong Qiao were a couple. However, when he saw someone conclude that Wen Yuan was Yi Mubai's wife, he smiled slightly. Wen Yuan drank a little too much. She sat on the other side of the car. She took off her high heels and curled up there. Her feet were exposed outside her skirt. They were fair and delicate. Yi Mubai watched quietly. Then he saved a video of him and Wen Yuan and a few photos that he liked. Then he called his secretary, Hina. Remove all the trending topics related to Wen Yuan, no matter what it takes. Hina was actually also looking at the trending topic. She was amazed by the beauty of Xiao Ye's wife. After receiving the call, she felt that it was a pity. However, she still obediently removed the trending topic. After all, Wen Yuan wasn't an artist. Her identity didn't need to be trending. Xiao Yi didn't want his wife to be seen by many people. Sigh, she was really beautiful. Yi Mubai hung up the phone and looked at Wen Yuan. She was looking at him. Her voice was hoarse. What's wrong? End of chapter. Chapter 39-34. He didn't say anything, but just grabbed her in his arms and kissed her passionately for a while. Then he said to the chauffeur in front, "Drive the car to the Four Seasons Hotel in front." The old chauffeur in front didn't know how to drive at all. Xiao Yi couldn't wait to drive now. Wen Yuan was also stunned. She was a little drunk, but not too drunk. She knew very well why he was bringing her to a hotel, and he even chose the Four Seasons Hotel. She instinctively said no, but Yi Mubai wasn't someone who would easily change his mind, especially when it came to matters regarding men. He pressed a button, separating the back seat from the front. He held her in his arms and reached out to pull out her hair. Her long hair was let loose and fell on her face, looking very beautiful. The back seat was filled with the smell of alcohol, which was very alluring. Yi Mubai gently licked and kissed her chin, his hands threaded into her hair. As he kissed, he murmured, "When I was playing the piano just now, what were you thinking about when you looked at my hand?" Wen Yuan bit her lip. "I wasn't thinking." "You're lying." His thin lips moved to the side of her lips, which were burning hot. "Wen Yuan, you were obviously thinking about how long my fingers are when I do this to you." With that, he succeeded. Wen Yuan cried out, "Yi Mubai, no." He hugged her and kissed the corner of her mouth. "Don't you like it?" He began to torture her, grinding so gently that Wen Yuan's heart trembled. But she didn't dare to make a sound, because she was afraid that the chauffeur in front would hear her. Yi Mubai chuckled lowly, lifting her beautiful chin with one hand and kissing her. "Don't you like it, hm?" Wen Yuan really couldn't stand it. She begged him to move his hand away, but it was useless. Instead, he treated her even worse. She really couldn't stand it anymore, so she could only hug his neck and bite hard on his shoulder. Yi Mubai was a little in pain, but he didn't care about the pain. His eyes were fixated on Wen Yuan, watching her soften in his arms. It was very tempting. He leaned close to her ear and murmured hoarsely, "Is it comfortable?" She couldn't say a single word. She lay limply in his arms, her face pressed against the side of his neck. At this moment, the scent of passion mixed with alcohol was the most seductive. Not only Yi Mubai, but when Yuan also sank into it, as though he was possessed by a demon. When she woke up, he carried her into the presidential suite and kicked the door open. He carried her to the master bedroom and dumped her on the soft, ridiculously large bed. When Yuan's black hair was scattered on the snow-white pillow, giving off a gorgeous vibe. The ash-gray gown she was wearing was glamorous and sexy. Yi Mubai bent over and kissed her, cupping her face and kissing her. He praised her skin and how beautiful everything about her was. He had never spoken words of love like this before. But now he wanted to tell her because he really liked her. His heart was moved, he really wanted her, he really wanted to take her for himself. He kissed her for a long time, then looked up at her intoxicated little face and chuckled. "You like it too, don't you?" When Yuan's expression was a little dazed. She stared into his eyes, reaching out and hugging his neck gently. Yi Mubai kissed her for a while more, reaching out to touch her red lips. He let her hold his fingers, and he teased her gently, when Yuan resisted and turned her face to the side, but he didn't let her go. He chased after her and forced her to cry. He laughed softly. "How's the taste?" End of chapter. Chapter 39-35. When Yuan's face was extremely red, but she couldn't do anything about it. He kept teasing her, letting her taste it. In the end, she couldn't take it anymore and bit his finger lightly. Yi Mubai's eyes darkened. He retracted his hand and held her face with both hands, kissing her. He had never been so patient before. It was as if he had a lifetime to do this. When Yuan trembled and buried her face into the pillow. He chased after her and kissed the soft flesh behind her ear. He kissed her again and again until her whole body went limp. At the peak of their passion, when Yuan looked up and tugged at his black hair, begging him to stop. "Be good." He comforted her, but it was torturous. For the entire night, he had been very gentle to her. But for Wen Yuan, she even wished that he would be rougher this night because he was too torturous. Due to the excessive indulgence, she still slept through the next morning. When Yuan woke up, it was already 10 o'clock. Yi Mubai was still there. When she opened her eyes, she saw his handsome face. Then she was kissed by him and even made out twice. When it was over, when Yuan lay in his arms. She had no energy left in her body, but he still seemed to be restless. She said weakly, "I don't have any energy left even if you want to." She didn't want to get up. It was probably because the feeling last night was good, so she didn't reject him today. After they were done, she still lay on his body, feeling lazy and comfortable. Yi Mubai's hand was on her back. He paused for a moment. "I'll carry you to soak for a while." She didn't want to, and he didn't want to either. But he knew that he was a little rough just now. He was afraid that he would hurt her, so he wanted to carry her to soak for a while. After he said that, when Yuan grunted, "Carry me." Yi Mubai smiled. He got up and carried her to the bathroom. 5 minutes later, when Yuan was comfortably soaking in the hot water, she was still lying in his arms. She was half asleep as he massaged her sore muscles. "Yi Mubai, where did you get those six-pack abs? You don't even work out." She laid on her stomach and looked at him like a little girl. Her hands were still in a mess. He laughed softly and let her do as she pleased. Then, when she cried out in surprise and tried to pull her hand away, he held it. His voice was hoarse. "The seventh piece," when Yuan bit his lip. "Let go of my hand. You were the one who touched me first, when Yuan. How can you do that?" He whispered into her ear. His voice was hoarse. "Settle it." When Yuan's face was as red as a tomato. She refused to budge and continued to lie in his arms. "When Yuan, you were the one who provoked me first." He bit down hard on her neck, causing her to cry out in pain. After that, he did it carelessly and hastily. When Yuan didn't want to soak anymore, so he carried her to the shower. In the end, he still pushed her against the bathroom wall. When Yuan was really exhausted and slept all the way until 1 in the afternoon. When she woke up, Yi Mubai was still there. He was wearing a white bathrobe and sitting on the sofa reading documents. There was a stack of documents on the other side. Secretary, he must have been there. When Yuan sat up and scratched her hair. She wanted to say something but stopped herself. Yi Mubai looked up and saw her. He smiled faintly and said lazily, "Don't worry. I won't let anyone see you like this, be it a man or a woman." As he said that, he put the documents aside and walked towards her. He leaned over and kissed her. "I'll get someone to send you something to eat. Are you hungry?" End of chapter. Chapter 39-36. She said a little embarrassedly, "You haven't eaten yet?" Yi Mubai didn't answer her at first. His fingers touched her face gently, and after a while, he said hoarsely, "I'm very full. Very satisfied." Wen Yuan, Yi Mubai got up and dialed the internal line. As he looked at Wen Yuan, he mouthed for her to get dressed. Then, he smiled when he saw her blushing face. After ordering a meal with the customer service, he hung up. "It'll be here in 20 minutes. Wash up first." Wen Yuan put on a bathrobe and went to the bathroom. Looking at herself in the mirror, she couldn't recognize herself. Her face was red, her hair was messy, and her eyes were misty. To put it nicely, she was lazy and sexy. To put it bluntly, she was overindulgent. She stared blankly for a long time before she tied up her hair, brushed her teeth, and washed her face. After tidying herself up, she walked out. Just then, the male waiter who delivered the food came over. Yi Mubai said in a low voice, "Go inside." When Yuan looked at her bare feet and her overly low neckline, she let out an "ah" and went back to the master bedroom, only coming out after a while. He still seemed a little unhappy. Sitting at the dining table, he scrutinized her as if he wanted to burn 2 holes in her. When Yuan tugged at her clothes and said softly, "It's not my own clothes." He was still glaring at her, but after a while, he calmed down and said mildly, "Sit down and eat." When Yuan sat down, he looked at her clean face, which was indescribably comfortable. His heart skipped a beat and he said softly, "Come here." When Yuan looked up, "I want to eat." He was still looking at her. "Come here." When Yuan still went over. As soon as she went over, he pulled her onto his lap and said, "Sit here and eat." His sudden kiss made Wen Yuan a little uncomfortable. Moreover, it was a little unbearable between 2 thin layers of clothing. She bit her lip and said very softly, "I want to come down." He had already started to feed her. Wen Yuan refused to be fed. "I'm not a little girl." Yi Mubai looked at her. "You want me to feed a little girl?" He smiled. "It can only be Yi Hui." Wen Yuan looked down. "I'll eat myself." He fed her persistently, "Eat or be eaten. You choose." She stared at him. She really couldn't stand him anymore. "Yi Mubai, can you not be so shameless?" He just stared at her and laughed. "What do you think?" Wen Yuan gave in and was fed by him mouthful by mouthful. After eating, she said in a low voice, "Yi Mubai, just once." He looked at her, his voice low and chuckling. "I only have one chance." As he spoke, he was about to tell her that he had done it many times and could do it many more times in the future. When Yuan's gaze was indescribable, Yi Mubai's voice was hoarse. "I've taken the medicine." Her gaze was even more indescribable. He smiled and nibbled the tip of her nose. "You took it for real?" "You're so stupid." When Yuan covered his nose and glared at him. He smiled and kissed her again. "All right, go take a rest. I'll go to the office after I'm done eating. Get the chauffeur to pick me up." Wen Yuan bit her lip and didn't leave immediately. Instead, she placed her hand on the back of his chair. Yi Mubai enjoyed the feeling of being kissed. He chuckled. "What's the matter?" Wen Yuan hugged his shoulders from behind. "Get the chauffeur to pick me up." Yi Mubai's body stiffened. After a long time, he turned to look at her. "Wen Yuan, you're acting coquettishly." End of chapter. Chapter 39-37. She didn't say anything. She just hugged his shoulder and gently rested her face on his shoulder. After a long time, she whispered, "I don't have any clothes to wear. My gown was torn by you last night." He was so gentle last night. She didn't understand why the gown was torn. Yi Mubai didn't ask any more. He just quietly finished his meal and turned around to lead her to the master bedroom. He threw her on the soft bed again. He didn't do anything but kiss her. He kissed her everywhere. Then he pressed against her ear. "Wen Yuan, I don't need to take medicine when you are like this," she trembled. He slowly moved over and nibbled on the tip of her nose. "I'll take you to the company. Let's come back tonight. There was a child at home." He couldn't be too indulgent. Wen Yuan buried her face in the pillow and said in a very low voice, "Yi Hui and Xiangnan. Yi Hui was sent to my mother's place. Xiangnan is grown up. There are chauffeurs and aunties to take care of him. What are you worried about?" Men and women were different. Although the love jade was like poison, Wen Yuan wouldn't be like him. She was still worried about the child at home. She wrapped her slender arms around his neck and buried her face in his shoulder. She said in a low voice, "Let's go back. I want to take Yi Hui home." Yi Mubai was stunned. He realized what she meant and his heart softened. He lowered his head and kissed the corner of her mouth. "Let's go back. I want to take Yi Hui home." Wen Yuan still wanted to say something, but he had already gotten up. He took 2 sets of clothes from the changing room. They were sent by Secretary He. He gave them to Wen Yuan. "Put them on. There is an important meeting in the afternoon." Otherwise, he would have chosen to spend the whole day here. Wen Yuan changed into the clothes he had prepared for her. It was a beige floral dress. It was very elegant. She tied her hair into a bun. She looked fresh and clean. She didn't put on any makeup and went out with him. Unexpectedly, the entrance of the hotel was surrounded by reporters. There were 30 to 40 of them asking questions. "Xiao Yi, I heard that you and Mrs. Yi left the banquet early. Are you going to have some alone time?" CEO Yi, Mrs. Yi was immediately removed from the hot search list. "It was your doing, right?" "Xiao Yi, you seem to love Mrs. Yi very much. Are you willing to give us an exclusive interview?" Yi Mubai's face was cold the whole time. He carried Wen Yuan in his arms and walked directly to the parking lot. His Mosan was parked there, and he opened the door to let Wen Yuan get in. He turned around, got in the car, and fastened his seatbelt. He didn't even care about the group of reporters. Wen Yuan, on the other hand, turned his head to look at him and asked softly, "I'm trending." Yi Mubai buckled his seatbelt and looked at her. "I'll give you a gift later." She gasped and looked at him. Yi Mubai smiled faintly. "You like it?" Wen Yuan looked at him with a curious expression. He started the car and drove towards the Starlight Building. It wasn't far, and it only took him about 20 minutes to get there. He unbuckled his seatbelt and led her out of the car and into the building. From the moment he walked into the building, he was very busy. In the lobby, he met a few middle and high-ranking officials and gave them a few instructions. When he arrived at the office on the top floor, he only sat for a while before going to the meeting. Wen Yuan stayed in his lounge to catch up on sleep. When she woke up, he was back. However, he was in the office having a team meeting with 2 executive vice presidents. Wen Yuan lay on the bed in the lounge and thought to herself, where did he get the energy from? He clearly did it so many times in one day and one night, or did he really take his medicine? End of chapter. Chapter 39-38. As she thought about it, her face heated up, and she didn't dare to think further. About half an hour later, he finally had time to relax. He walked into the lounge and saw that Wen Yuan was awake. He bent down and bit her face. "How long have you been awake?" "Half an hour." She turned her body sideways, her expression relaxed and soft. He really wanted to have her once here, but thinking that she might not be able to take it, he gave up and changed it to a light kiss. After a long time, he let go of her and said in a low voice, "I'll show you something." Wen Yuan bit her lower lip. "What?" He pulled her up, helped her tidy her hair, and pulled her out. In his office, Wen Yuan saw a huge photo and a few smaller photo frames. It was her playing the piano last night and playing the piano with him. And on his desk, there was a single photo of her sitting alone on the sofa and looking out at the night sky. The side profile was very beautiful. "Do you like it?" He smiled. "The photo of us playing the piano together can be hung in the bedroom as a wedding photo. I want to put this big one in the living room." It matches the decoration. As for the other photos, some could be placed in his study, and some could be placed in her private changing room. Wen Yuan looked at them and then looked at him. These are the photos that are trending? He smiled. Yes, but I don't want to share you with others. So I removed it. Wen Yuan didn't like to be in the limelight, but she liked these photos very much. She agreed and asked him when she could hang it at home. Yi Mubai smiled and walked over to call the internal line to ask Secretary He to get someone to do it. In a while, a few people came in to send the things to the villa. When they returned, it had been hung up according to his request. Their bedroom finally looked like a married couple's place. Wen Yuan looked at the photo frame on the bedside table. She liked it very much. She looked at it for a long time. Yi Mubai hugged her from behind. Do you like it? Yes. She turned her head and smiled. Why did you do this all of a sudden? He whispered into her ear, because you look like a little wife now. Last night's reward. Wen Yuan was furious. He turned around and glared at him. Yi Mubai, you're too despicable. Damn it, you were so happy last night and you kept biting me, huh? He hugged her waist, kissed her, and whispered against her face. She had never been able to handle him like this. Wen Yuan bit his lips. Yi Mubai. Yi Mubai chuckled. Scared? With that said, he turned her around and nibbled on the tip of her nose. I'll let you go tonight. She was speechless for a moment. Is it fun for Yi Mubai to play tricks on me? He pressed his forehead against hers. Mrs. Yi, you want me not to let you go, eh? She snorted softly and then whispered, Yi Mubai. His voice was as gentle as the night. I know. I'll take it slow. He knew what she was worried about. What they were touching now was not only flesh and blood, but also souls. Wen Yuan was a little afraid. He comforted her, saying that it didn't matter, that he could wait. He kissed her, carried her to the desk in the study, and gave it to her gently, just to please her, not for his own sake. He said that he could wait for her to love him slowly. At this moment, she really felt the gentleness that belonged to Yi Mubai. She wanted to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1. Husband, addicted to pampering. Talking about life and looking for a bosom friend, recommending the urban guru Shi Xinshu. Chapter 39-39. That night, he didn't do anything to her. After settling Xiangnan down, he took her to the study and gave her a book to read while he dealt with his work. He said that he had been putting in a lot of effort for her recently and that he had neglected his work. With that, he planted a kiss on her forehead. Wen Yuan looked at him. Do it twice less. His eyes were full of smiles as he looked at her and chuckled. Wen Yuan, you're obviously not saying what you mean. Am I making you uncomfortable? She looked up helplessly. He smiled and pinched her cheek. All right, stop fooling around. I'll accompany you after I'm done. I don't need you to accompany me. Wen Yuan licked his lips and said bitterly. He looked at her and suddenly leaned over. She thought that he was going to do something to her, so she closed her eyes and let out a small scream. However, what she expected didn't happen. He only nibbled on the tip of her nose and chuckled. Wen Yuan, you're so cute. Wen Yuan. She blushed a little. He stepped back and the expensive fabric of his clothes made a slight sound. She then opened her eyes and looked at him. His eyes were still smiling as he stared at her. After a long time, he reached out and pinched her cheek. Silly. Wen Yuan could only pretend to read because it was too embarrassing. Yi Mubai walked over and wanted to light a cigarette. However, he gave up when he saw Wen Yuan and said to her instead, Wen Yuan, help me make a cup of coffee. Wen Yuan put down the book and stared at him for a while before getting up to make the coffee for him. Yi Mubai was a man who liked to enjoy himself. In this aspect, he was somewhat similar to Qinshan, just not as exaggerated. He had a very good coffee machine. Wen Yuan hadn't used it much and only made a cup of coffee for him after half an hour. She took a sip and felt that it was too bitter, so she added cream and sugar. When she brought it to him, he took a sniff. Then he looked at Wen Yuan in surprise. Unexpectedly, it tasted terrible. She actually added cream to his drink. And sugar. However, he still drank half a cup. Wen Yuan coughed lightly. It tastes good, doesn't it? He looked at her, then reached out and pulled her into his arms. Her body fell onto his lap, and he kissed her. Their lips intertwined, and she tasted the coffee she had brewed. After a long time, he let go of her and said in a low and husky voice, "How does it taste?" When Yuan bit her lip, and then she couldn't help but lick her lower lip, like a kitten licking paste. He kissed her again, and she couldn't help herself. When Yuan sat on his lap, her hands clutching his shirt, and she was as helpless as a young girl. After a long kiss, her face was intoxicated, and her eyes were misty. Yi Mubai chuckled. "When Yuan, you really give me a sense of accomplishment." With that said, he placed her in his arms. With one arm hugging her, he flipped through the documents with the other. From time to time, he would stroke her as if he was petting a kitten. When Yuan moved uncomfortably, he would say in a low voice, "If you move again, shall we go back to the room? Why don't we do it here?" When Yuan didn't dare to move. After some time, her legs were sore, and she couldn't help but say, "Yi Mubai, aren't you tired?" "I'm tired." He smiled. "I've exhausted myself, when Yuan." She couldn't help but say, "That's not what I'm talking about." "But that's what I wanted to say." He chuckled, then closed the documents. "I'm not reading anymore." She wanted to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1, hubby, addicted to pampering. Talking about life, looking for a confidence. Chapter 3940. He carried her back to the bedroom. When Yuan's voice was a little stammering, "Why? I'm not as pretty as you." He whispered against her lips while holding her. After a few steps, he went back to the bedroom. He put her on the bed, leaned over and kissed her. His fingers went through her hair and kissed her gently. When Yuan was moved, but she resisted. She was afraid that he would do it again. She put her hands on his shoulders and said in a low voice, "Aren't you exhausted?" He buried his face in her neck and chuckled, "I didn't say I would do it." When Yuan turned her face away, "Why do you always hug and kiss me if you don't want to do it?" He held her face and chased after her to kiss her. "Do you miss me, when Yuan?" She turned her face away embarrassedly. Her face was very hot. Yi Mubai chuckled, "Let me check." He moved his hands up and down while saying that. He sighed, "What if Mrs. Yi needs it and Mr. Yi is exhausted again?" She was so amused by him that she didn't know what to do. She reached out to hug him and held his hand with her other hand to stop him from doing evil again. Yi Mubai just let her hold his hand tightly. After a long time, he got close to her ear and said in a low voice, "Mrs. Yi, it's bad. Mr. Yi wants it now." When Yuan hugged him tightly and said in a trembling voice, "Yi Mubai," she felt very ashamed, but she still got close to his ear and whispered, "I'm still in pain." He turned her face and said in a hoarse voice, "Let me see." She didn't want to, but he still pressed her head down. When he looked up again, his eyes were a little deep. Then he kissed her again for a long time. Then he went to get the medicine for the wound and carefully applied it on Wen Yuan. She kept lying with her face buried in the pillow and her fingers clutched the bed sheet. Yi Mubai smiled. "Wen Yuan, you look like it's your first time." She looked at him with misty eyes, and so did he. Then he leaned over and kissed her again. He didn't know how many times and how long he had kissed her that night. It was like a night. Then he gently whispered in her ear, "Wen Yuan, I think I've really fallen in love with you." She was bewildered, and he placed her hand over his heart. His heart was beating very fast. Perhaps it was because they were moved, but their relationship improved. Although Wen Yuan stayed at home like before, Yi Mubai would find time to accompany her to watch concerts and go shopping. Wen Yuan did not lack anything, so she would bring him to some antique shops to look at some ornaments. Occasionally she would buy some. She had a good eye, so she would always be able to buy some very artistic things. Yi Mubai liked to accompany her, even more than he paid attention to Xiangnan and Yi Hui. In the beginning, he came home very early. He would pick up Xiangnan and guide Xiangnan in his homework. Then he would bathe Yi Hui and play games. He became a good husband and father. However, Wen Yuan needed to repay his efforts at night. He often trapped her under his body and teased her until she blushed and her heart raced. He was only willing to give it to her when she begged him. In the end, he would even say that she had overused him. It was obvious that he liked women, but he still forced her to admit that it was what she wanted. He was too despicable. However, such feelings that were soaked in love and desire were like a dose of poison. When Yuan couldn't refuse it, she started to be different from before. The clothes in her wardrobe started to be bright and lively, unlike before, which was always in line with the norm. She wanted to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1. Husband, addicted to pampering. Talking about life and looking for a bosom friend. Chapter 3941. She even began to like wearing jeans and sweaters, or black casual pants and shirts, because he always took her out, when Yuan wanted to cut her hair shorter, but he didn't allow it. When Yuan felt strange. It's more convenient to cut it shorter. At that time, Yi Mubai was reading documents and seemed to be absent-minded. She asked again, and he put down the documents and looked at her. Because, when you lie on the bed without clothes, your long hair is very tempting. When Yuan said, Yi Mubai, pretend that I didn't ask this question. When she ran away, he laughed and then pulled her back to kiss her. After kissing her for a long time, he picked her up and put her on the bed. He peeled her as clean as an egg, lifted her hair, and said in a low voice, just like this. When Yuan said, Yi Mubai, you're overindulging me. That's also Mrs. Ye's fault. He whispered sexily, when Yuan, you don't know how beautiful your body is. Sometimes she would also take Yi Hui to his company. She and Yi Hui would sit on the sofa. Yi Hui would play with toys while she would read a book. Yi Mubai had a lot of meetings, so he would play with Yi Hui in the office for a while. Yi Hui fell asleep. When Yuan covered her with the quilt and said in a low voice, I'd better not bring Yi Hui here in the future. After saying that, she looked up and was kissed by him. After a long time, Yi Mubai sucked her lips and said in a low voice, I want to see you. He looked at Yi Hui, then carried Wen Yuan out and put her on the sofa in the office. He kissed her. Wait a minute. She watched him get up and walk to the desk. She pressed the internal line. Secretary He, I won't receive anyone today. Secretary He was stunned for a moment and then understood. Su Yi, had something to do? She shook her head and smiled gently. Co Yi had entered the honeymoon period. In the office, Yi Mubai walked back slowly and sat next to Wen Yuan. His fingers gently stroked her face. Here on the desk, Wen Yuan buried her face in his lower abdomen and hugged his waist. I miss Wen Yuan. He lowered his head and kissed her. He also knew that he had been a little too indulgent recently. For more than a month, other than her period, he had dominated her several times almost every night. Sometimes, when it was raging, he didn't know where he got the energy from. It was as if he didn't know fatigue or tiredness and just wanted to possess her. At this moment, looking at the faint blue color under her eyes, his heart softened. He gently put down the palm that was originally caressing her and faintly smiled, I'll let you go. When Yuan made an "oh" sound and obediently rested his face on the side of his legs, his arms still hugging him, he laughed again. Acting spoiled again? Wen Yuan, you're already in your 30s. Not as young as the girls in your company, right? She said softly, her fingers gently tracing his heart. In fact, compared to a love, she preferred this kind of embrace. After Wen Yuan said that, he laughed. I don't even know what they look like. How do you work? She bit her lip. Yi Mubai, if one day you really have an affair with an artist in the company, he sat up a little straighter. Then what? Wen Yuan thought for a long time before he came up with a word. I'll just ignore you. He stared at her for a long time and couldn't help laughing. Wen Yuan, I thought you could say something powerful, such as asking me to freeze her and never cooperate with her again. I want to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1. Husband, addicted to pampering. Talking about life and looking for a confidant. Chapter 3942. I won't. I'll get a divorce, she added faintly and looked at him. Yi Mubai was stunned. He held her face and said word by word, "I won't give you this chance. Better be like this." She propped herself up. "Otherwise, I'll cut you up myself." He stared at her and smiled. Then, he grabbed her hand and pulled it over. "You're going to cut me up, ach? Is it here?" Wen Yuan was very embarrassed when he pulled her over. She simply lay in his arms. "Yi Mubai, don't be so shameless," he chuckled. "Am I shameless or are you shameless? HM? You want to cut me up? Wen Yuan, have you eaten a bear's heart or a leopard's gall?" With that, he pressed her little hand and put his thin lips next to her ear. "Help me get it out, HM?" Wen Yuan bit her lip. "Yi Mubai, you're simply lustful and crazy at the same time." He chuckled. "Then, do you like lustful and crazy?" Wen Yuan sat in his arms. Her face was a little red and her eyes were watery. He stopped joking around. His deep eyes locked onto her and his voice was very low. "Wen Yuan." Her long hair was scattered on her shoulders. She looked like she had been abused. She knelt in his arms and was a little helpless. She wanted to break free, but he wouldn't let her. Wen Yuan bit her lip. "I don't know." He leaned over and whispered into her soft ear. "You like me, Wen Yuan. You like how I treat you. You also like how I do things to you. You hug me every time. How dare you say you don't like me?" She buried her face in his shoulder. She didn't allow him to say anything else. He laughed like a spring breeze. Then he kissed her crazily. He pressed her on the sofa and forced her to kiss him. Just when he was about to take off her clothes, the door of the office was pushed open. The person who came in was the one with the plastic surgery face. Her name was Zhang Meng. She was wearing a white dress and barged into Yi Mubai and Wen Yuan's world. Yi Mubai was interrupted. His body floated above Wen Yuan, and his face darkened. "Get lost." The girl begged, "Su Yi, please don't terminate the contract with me. I can get it back." It wasn't easy for her to get into Stars Entertainment and she didn't want to walk out. Artists who terminated their contracts with Stars Entertainment would become useless, so she ignored the company's rules and barged into CEO Ye's office. She didn't expect there to be a woman in CEO Ye's office. She subconsciously thought that it was an unspoken rule because she didn't see clearly that it was Wen Yuan. Her voice was soft. "Su Yi, I can do it too." "Can what?" Yi Mubai sneered. Then he got up, walked to the office and pressed the intercom. "Secretary He, get security here." Zhang Meng is stunned. She is in a trance. "Boss Yi, don't you like this face very much?" Wen Yuan sat up and glared at Yi Mubai. "What the fuck?" He looked at her helplessly. At this moment, little Yi Hui woke up. She ran out of the lounge and threw herself into Wen Yuan's arms. "Mommy." Wen Yuan hugged her. Little Yi Hui's voice was crisp. "Mommy, are you sleeping outside with Daddy? Are you doing a mysterious mission?" This was what her brother had told her. Wen Yuan couldn't answer such a shameful question, so he looked at Yi Mubai. The father said seriously, "Yi Hui, only Daddy and Mommy can do this kind of mysterious mission." Yi Hui replied with an "oh," and returned to the lounge. Yi Mubai suppressed the desire that had just arisen and looked at Wen Yuan. His voice was especially gentle as he said, "Go and accompany Yi Hui. I'll handle things here. I want to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1. Husband, addicted to pampering. Talking about life and looking for bosom friends." Chapter 39:43. "Oh," Wen Yuan replied and walked over. Only Yi Mubai and the girl named Zhang Meng were left in the office. At this time, the security guards came over. However, Yi Mubai told them not to take action. He just said calmly, "I love my wife very much. I won't do anything unspoken. Also, the termination of the contract is the company's decision. It has nothing to do with personal reasons. I hope you understand." Zhang Meng looked at him with tears in her eyes. "I thought the nightclub liked this face. I like my wife." Yi Mubai smiled slightly and then raised his hand. "Miss Zhang, please leave." When Zhang Meng left, she left in tears. After she left, Su Mo came over in a hurry. She must have heard the news just now. She was a little stunned and closed the door after a long time. Yi Mubai looked at her. It's a pity. She's very talented. Su Mo was silent for a while and then said in a low voice, she wanted to take the shortcut. In fact, not everyone was like Wen Yuan. Wen Yuan was the one who took the initiative, but Yi Mubai didn't have a wife. Now that Co Yi had a wife and a son and a daughter, what was the point of making her look like Lin Sisi? After saying that, Su Mo looked at Yi Mubai. The contract has been terminated. For humanitarian reasons, she didn't pay for the company's losses. Yi Mubai looked at her. Su Mo smiled bitterly. I paid for her. Otherwise, how could a northerner have the money to pay for the liquidated damages? Moreover, it was a sky-high price. Yi Mubai glanced at her, walked to the desk and sat down. He said calmly, Su Mo, if you continue to be so generous, you may become very poor. I won't. Su Mo smiled maliciously. Wen Yuan gave me 1% of Starlight Entertainment's shares. After saying that, she smiled at Yi Mubai. I've long known that Wen Yuan is a spendthrift. After Su Mo left, Yi Mubai sat there for a while and then laughed. On the way back, Wen Yuan and Yi Hui sat in the back seat. Yi Mubai was focused on driving and occasionally glanced at Wen Yuan and Yi Hui. Wen Yuan's eyes met hers, and she immediately lowered her head. Together, they went to fetch Xiangnan home. After dinner, the father immediately threw Xiao Yi Hui to Xiangnan. Take care of little sister. Little sister will sleep with you tonight. Xiangnan, Daddy and Mommy are going to do another mysterious mission. Yi Mubai took Wen Yuan to the study. Unlike before, he pressed her against the door. Do you have anything to say to me? Wen Yuan looked at him and shook his head. He pinched her face. It's about squandering Ichim? She held back her laughter. I really didn't. Su Mo. He gave her another hint, his body leaning forward, hinting that if she didn't tell him, he was going to get serious. Wen Yuan finally confessed, I gave Su Mo 1% of Starlight's shares. He stared at her for a few seconds, then released her and sat down on the sofa. Wen Yuan leaned against the door and looked at him silently for a while. Then he walked over and half knelt beside him. Are you angry? He turned his head and smiled faintly. No. He reached out and stroked her face. I know that you wanted to thank Su Mo and help her. Why didn't you tell me? She didn't say anything. Later, he understood. He sighed and didn't say anything. He just reached out and gently stroked her hair. I know. If there's anything in the future, you can tell me directly, Him? She nodded and put her hand on his shoulder. She leaned her face close to him. You're really not angry anymore? I want to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1. Husband, addicted to pampering. Talking about life and looking for confidence. Chapter 3944. He glanced at her. His heart was soft, but he didn't show it on his face. What do you think? She coaxed him, which was rare. How can I not be angry? He leaned on the sofa and smiled lazily. Sit here. She blushed. She knew that he wanted to make up for what happened in the office. You don't want to? He looked at her and sighed. Then I'd better be angry. I just don't know if it will affect Su Mo. After all, I have a boss who is in a bad mood and dissatisfied with you, Chio. When Yuan stared at him, her eyes were full of tears. After hesitating for a long time, she put her hand on his shoulder and moved herself to sit on his lap. But before she sat down, his big palm cushioned her. She sat on his palm. She was wearing a dress, so it was a bit messy. When Yuan's face was very hot, she leaned her face on his shoulder and said in a trembling voice, Xiangnan and Yi Hui are not asleep yet. Xiangnan will take care of his sister. His fingers succeeded, and when Yuan also moaned. She was in a mess because of his teasing. He was still in the mood to chat. Last time you said that Yi Hui should go to the nursery. I thought about it. It seems that what my mother said is also very reasonable. It's better for Yi Hui to receive preschool education in advance. While he was talking, his fingers were not idle. When Yuan gritted her teeth, she couldn't hear it clearly. When she opened her mouth, her voice was like a kitten. What? He looked at her forehead, which was covered with fine sweat, and smiled gently. Yihui should go to the nursery, huh? Wen Yuan was stunned and subconsciously objected. No, he chuckled, tormenting her even more. Wen Yuan bit his shoulder. Don't. No what? Don't you want Yihui to go to school, or don't you want me to do this? He asked in her ear. Wen Yuan endured it. His eyes were wet, like an innocent deer. She pressed her face against his and said in a broken voice, I don't know. He kept teasing her, forcing her to say all kinds of shameful things. Wen Yuan was a very traditional-looking woman, and her personality was also very traditional. Every time they did it, her heart would turn red and her heart would race. Yi Mubai found it very interesting. Moreover, after such a long time, he still maintained a strong interest in their relationship. Even he himself was surprised, because according to a certain conclusion, no matter how beautiful a woman was, a man would lose his excitement after sleeping with her for a month. But he was different, he still wanted it every day. After a long time, she softened in his arms and did not get up for a long time. He looked down at her and bit the tip of her nose. Useless thing. Wen Yuan blushed and reached down to grab his hand, wanting to pull his palm away. However, he chuckled in a low voice. This isn't enough to satisfy you, is it? Her eyes widened. You said you would let me go today? Did I? He smiled faintly. Just now, I think you agreed, for Suemo, for me. She blushed and looked at him. After a long time, she actually leaned down. Yi Mubai was surprised. Then he gently grabbed her hair. Wen Yuan. She looked up and he murmured, I can't bear to. Perhaps he was like all men in the past and enjoyed it, but now that he loved her so much, he really couldn't bear to. He pulled her up and held her in his arms. He carefully stroked her head. Be good, I don't have to do this. Wen Yuan buried herself in his arms and said in a soft and hoarse voice, But I like it. I want to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1. Husband, addicted to pampering. Talking about life and looking for a confidant. Chapter 39:45. Yi Mubai was stunned. After a long time, he murmured in a trembling voice, Wen Yuan, you said you like it? Her face was slightly red and she was quite shy. Didn't you say that many women like it? His mind was in a mess. What happened after that? Yi Mubai's mind was in a mess. He almost couldn't think. But in the end he still pulled her into his arms in time. Later, she gently poked him in his arms. Yi Mubai. He hummed and looked down at her. He couldn't help but kiss her. After kissing her for a long time, he murmured, I feel very good. How about you? Wen Yuan leaned in his arms and said in a low voice, I'm fine. But she was a little embarrassed and couldn't say it out loud. But Yi Mubai knew. For Wen Yuan, it was very hard. He pressed her down and couldn't help but lower his head to kiss her. In the end, he couldn't help but hold her in his arms and treat her gently. Late at night, when Wen Yuan was asleep, Yi Mubai quietly looked at her sleeping face and let out a long sigh. What a prodigal! The next day, he went to the company without Wen Yuan. As soon as he arrived, he called Secretary He. Call Manager Su over. Secretary He smiled. Is it Manager Suemo? Yi Mubai looked up. Secretary He smiled again and went to look for him. Suemo came over in less than 10 minutes and sat opposite Yi Mubai. What's the matter, So Yi? What do you think? He glanced at her and took out a check from the drawer. He put it on the table and slowly pushed it over. Suemo took a look at it. 200 million. Transfer 1% of your assets to me, Yi Mubai said lightly. Suemo smiled. But 1% is more than 200 million. Don't be too greedy. Wen Yuan is a prodigal, but it doesn't mean that I will indulge you. Yi Mubai said very indifferently, I know you're short on money, but this is enough for you to live a few lifetimes without worrying about food or clothing, as long as you don't have such rotten intentions. He knew that it had not been easy for Suemo in the past 2 years. Although she looked like a high-class white-collar worker, she had lost all her relatives in the past 2 years. She had opened a homeless home and adopted homeless elderly people and some animals. Other than her own salary, Wen Yuan was also the biggest spendthrift, and he was the biggest spendthrift. Su Imo had never told Wen Yuan about these things. She was smart. Yi Mubai didn't want Wen Yuan to know about these things. He didn't want Wen Yuan's life to be tainted by these things, so he had been indulging Yi Mo. Su Mo took the check and then threw a document on Yi Mubai's desk. Her voice was a little low. Only that idiot Wen Yuan didn't realize that you gave her 14 shares. I won't steal someone's love. She paused and said, Su Yi, you are actually a good person. He had always been a good person, but under the guise of a businessman. Yi Mubai smiled. I used to work hard to advocate for the protection of animals and world peace, but now I realize that being an unscrupulous businessman has changed the world more. Come on. Su Mo exposed him. You just want to be an unscrupulous businessman so that Wen Yuan will worship you. But Wen Yuan still likes artistic use. You have so much money, but it still can't make up for playing a song with him. These days, Wen Yuan seemed to be possessed. He became enthusiastic towards Yi Mubai again, and there were stars in his eyes. It was probably because of this that Yi Mubai was lit up. I want to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1. Husband, addicted to pampering. Talking about life, looking for confidants. Chapter 3946. Yi Mubai stared at Su Mo for a long time before he snorted. Really? Although he didn't want to admit it, it was the truth. Su Mo smiled. Su Yi, you know it best, don't you? This time, Yi Mubai only snorted and didn't bother to say a word to her. If it weren't for Wen Yuan, he would have fired this guy right now. Su Mo left Yi Mubai's office and went to the bank to transfer the money. She had a small charity fund that she had been running for more than a year. She was at the end of her rope when she remembered the 1% that Wen Yuan had given her. She was very grateful to Wen Yuan. In the past 2 years, she had cheated Wen Yuan a lot. Wen Yuan had never refused her when she asked for money. Later, when he found out that she was very short of money, he simply gave her 1% and said that she could get a bonus of tens of thousands of yuan every year. Su Mo thought that maybe it was Wen Yuan's purity that made Yi Mubai like him. Wen Yuan was a very romantic person, but he hid it well and lived an ordinary life. However, after getting to know him, she realized that he didn't know anything about daily necessities. She had worked before, but she didn't have any concept of money. 1% of Starlight was worth about 1 billion yuan. She didn't even know that he had given it to her so easily. Su Mo was very envious of such a friend. She was even a little jealous, but she really liked Wen Yuan. 200 million was a great help to her. She transferred the money and was about to leave the bank when she remembered something. She dialed Kong Qiao's number. You haven't received the performance fee from last time. I asked your assistant, and she said it was your idea. Kong Qiao, I know you don't lack money, but business is business, okay? Kong Qiao thought for a moment and smiled. Okay. He met Su Mo in a cafe. When he arrived, Su Mo was already there. He sat opposite her and smiled. How long have you been here? I'm working here. Su Mo pushed a cup of coffee in front of him. Your favorite American coffee, no sugar. He chuckled. While drinking, Su Mo pushed a check in front of him. 5 million yuan, it settled. Kong Qiao took it and smiled. The two of them drank coffee together and did not talk much. They knew each other because of Wen Yuan. Although they were close, they were not that close. However, he could feel that she liked him. As long as he didn't say it out loud, he wouldn't feel uncomfortable. Kong Qiao drank half a cup of coffee and said with a faint smile, I still have something to do, so I'll be leaving first. Thank you, Su Mo. He wanted to leave, but Su Mo suddenly reached out and stopped him. Wait a minute. She didn't know why. She suddenly wanted to confess. She didn't want to confess before because she knew how much Kong Qiao loved Wen Yuan. Su Mo held his hand and said in a low voice, just for a while, okay Kong Qiao? He seemed to have sensed something as he lowered his head to look at her hand that was holding his. After a moment of hesitation, he sat down and said, Su Mo, there's something. She knew that he was rejecting her, but she just wanted to say it. Su Mo held the coffee cup and lowered her eyes. Her voice became even lower. I know I'm young and can't meet your standards. Kong Qiao sighed. That was my nonsense, I will not use this as a standard. Suemo looked at him and said slowly, Kong Qiao, don't I have the slightest possibility? He stared at her and sighed. Suemo, there is some stubbornness that even you can't control yourself. I want to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1. Husband, addicted to pampering. Talk about life and find a confidant. Chapter 3947. His refusal was very tactful, but Su Yao understood. She lowered her eyes and said in a very low voice, I know, Kong Qiao. I didn't give up. In fact, I knew the result. Maybe it's because the coffee tastes good today. She smiled at him, and it was a very bright smile. She was a very good girl. Kong Qiao knew that, but he didn't feel anything for her. He couldn't say too much sorry because he never needed to apologize if he didn't like her, just like how Wen Yuan treated him. He wanted to leave, but Suemo said, she's very good. He paused. She and Yi Mubai have been very close recently. Yi Mubai has fallen in love with her. Kong Qiao, don't wait for her. Go find a girl to marry. You won't be able to wait for Wen Yuan. Suemo smiled lightly. Kong Qiao still smiled slightly. I didn't deliberately wait. It's just that I haven't found a suitable one. I don't want to force myself and I don't want to delay others. He got up and left. Suemo sat in the coffee shop under the afternoon sun. She sat there for the whole afternoon. She was heartbroken. She confessed, but the man didn't like her. She found Wen Yuan and wanted to eat and drink with him. Recently Yi Hui had gone to school, so Wen Yuan was more free. It was okay to eat, but she didn't dare to drink because Yi Mubai would get angry. He would object to everything that he thought a woman shouldn't have. If she didn't change, he would get angry. So, when Wen Yuan brought it up, he was a little shaken. Suemo said that she broke up with her boyfriend and wants me to accompany her. Yi Mubai sat on the sofa and read a magazine. It's going to be dinner soon. You can ask her to come here to eat. Yi Mubai. Wen Yuan said a little fiercely. Suemo said she was heartbroken. What's wrong with me asking her to come to our house? He held the magazine and smiled. Are you afraid that she will seduce me? Yi Mubai. Wen Yuan glared at him. You're talking nonsense. He put down the magazine, crossed his hands, and coughed softly. Then tell me she was heartbroken? Why didn't I hear that she was in love before? Who was she heartbroken with? Wen Yuan looked at him blankly. I didn't ask. Shouldn't I ask this later? He pulled her into his arms and let her lie on his lap. He punched her butt. Do you know who she met today? Wen Yuan pretended not to understand. Yi Mubai lifted her chin. It's Kong Qiao. Madam Yi, do you think I'll let you go to her and let her talk with you all night about Concho? Wen Yuan looked at him and said, Then, are we just going to ignore her? Mubai, Suemo is my friend. She added, Suemo doesn't have many friends. He snorted coldly. That's because she has a weird temper and is greedy for money. All of her friends have been cheated. Only a fool like Wen Yuan, who had a mountain of gold and silver in his family that Suemo had swindled out of, was able to preserve their friendship. After he said this, Wen Yuan was stunned. After a long time, he said, Yi Mubai, Suemo isn't that kind of person. He gazed at her and smiled faintly. You can ask her yourself. But she's also very stupid. Wen Yuan thought that he would not agree, but Yi Mubai changed his tone and said, You can go, but Wen Yuan, don't drink, or I'll break your legs when I come back. You only know how to use domestic violence. She muttered discontentedly. Then he smiled. When my brother and Shirley got married, they fought fiercely. Wen Yuan, do you want me to show you what real domestic violence is? I want to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1. Husband, addicted to pampering. Talking about life and looking for confidants. Chapter 3948. Wen Yuan stared at him with an infuriating gaze. He smiled and got up. Where are you going? I'll take you there. She pulled him. No, I'll drive myself. Yi Mubai leaned forward and bit the tip of her nose. Mrs. Yi, this is one of the conditions. Otherwise, there will be no benefits. Wen Yuan looked at him. But you had a meeting the whole afternoon today. Don't go if you feel sorry for me. He looked at her and smiled. Wen Yuan got up. I'll go upstairs to change. He pulled her. She turned around. What's wrong? Yi Mubai's voice was hoarse. Dress conservatively. Wen Yuan smiled and turned to go upstairs. When he went downstairs, he changed into a set of very casual clothes and tied his hair into a ponytail. He was very satisfied with it. In the car, Wen Yuan looked at his handsome side profile from time to time. Are you angry? He gestured and smiled. Yes, I'm angry. You've been working hard all day, and your wife has to accompany someone else. Wen Yuan was unhappy. I'm with you every day. Now that she thought about it, she felt that something was wrong. She was now like a pendant on his body. He took her everywhere he went. Yi Hui was sent to school by him, but she went to his company every day to report. When she didn't want to go, he would say that the incident with Zhang Meng meant that she didn't go to his company often, which was why there was a misunderstanding. Wen Yuan felt that he was very diligent. It was obvious that he wanted someone to accompany him every day. Every time she made up her mind not to go to the company with him, he always had a way to torture her in bed. She either went to the company or in bed. Wen Yuan missed her husband so much that he was not so powerful because he was too tired. The more she thought about it, the less she wanted to talk to him. She turned her face to the side. Yi Mubai looked at her and said softly, right now, you're indirectly interacting with someone who likes you. Wen Yuan, I'm not angry yet. Why are you angry? She stared at him. He was really good at changing the concept, and Wen Yuan couldn't defend himself. Later, she ignored him in a fit of pique until he sent her to a fish house. He unfastened her seatbelt and smiled. No drinking. When Wen Yuan got out of the car and closed the door, he stuck out his tongue at him. Just drink. He found it funny and infuriating at the same time. This was the first time Wen Yuan acted like this. But it felt good. Yi Mubai originally wanted to drive back, but thinking that the aunties at home were all there, he was too lazy to drive back, so he directly waited for Wen Yuan here. Although he was also very familiar with Su Mo, he was not interested in two women having a meal together, especially when the male lead was Kong Qiao. The reason why he was so generous was because their relationship had been good recently. He sat in the car, smoked a few cigarettes, and then scrolled through his phone. Wen Yuan didn't know that he didn't leave, so he went to find Su Mo. Su Mo sat in the corner and ordered a platter, waiting to be served. What surprised Wen Yuan was that Su Mo actually ordered erguod. Wen Yuan sat down, and Su Mo looked up at her before pouring himself a glass of erguod. He then looked at Wen Yuan and said, "You drink. Pour it for me as well." Wen Yuan said indifferently. Su Mo's hand that was holding the bottle trembled. Aren't you afraid that Yi Mubai will skin you alive? Wen Yuan looked at Su Mo. What I'm most afraid of is him taking off my clothes. After she said that, Su Mo laughed and trembled. Wen Yuan, is it true? I'm not lying to you, he's very good. Wen Yuan poured himself a glass. If he doesn't let me drink, I'll drink it. I want to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1. Husband, addicted to pampering. Talking about life, looking for confidence. Chapter 3949. Su Mo looked at Wen Yuan blankly and said after a long time, "Aren't you afraid that your Co Yi will take off your clothes?" "I'm not afraid." Wen Yuan took a sip of wine and felt that it was spicy. Then she complained, "He will take it off every day anyway." She raised her glass and clinked it with Su Mo. Don't think too highly of men. They are not good people. It's better to be single. Su Mo clinked her glass with Wen Yuan and watched him take another sip. She felt that something was wrong. She was the one who wanted to drown her sorrows, so why did Wen Yuan drink it? She coughed lightly. There are many women who want Co Yi to take off their clothes. Wen Yuan, don't take it for granted. Then Su Mo looked down at her airport. Look, I'm being despised by others. Xiong Xiao, I don't even know if he is a little boy or not. Wen Yuan laughed, then she leaned over and whispered, when I was learning piano with Kong Qiao's mother, many of Kong Qiao's schoolmates chased after him. Their school was circulating about Kong Qiao's nude photos. It's true, Suemo. You can look forward to it. Suemo looked at Wen Yuan suspiciously. You know about this? My teacher will tell me. Wen Yuan smiled and began to brush the fish. Maybe my teacher wanted to mess with us at that time, but you know what happened later. Suemo was stunned for a long time before she said in a low voice, I thought Kong Qiao's mother was arrogant because of the Kong family's scholarly background. My teacher can be very avant-garde sometimes. Wen Yuan sighed softly, feeling a little nostalgic. It had been a long time since she last saw her teacher. She heard that her teacher was not in good health and wanted to visit him, but she was afraid that Yi Mubai would be unhappy, so Wen Yuan didn't dare to mention it. Now that she thought about it, she felt sorry for her teacher. But Su Mo's focus wasn't on this. She asked in a low voice, so Kong Qiao's mother taught you to take the risk and plot to sleep with Yi Mubai? Lower your voice. Wen Yuan looked around. No, I just wanted to be with him. As long as I loved him, it didn't matter if he loved me or not. But later, I realized that it's very painful not to be loved. Suemo. She placed her hand on the back of Sumo's hand. Promise me that you'll treat yourself well. Don't force yourself. It's good to be free sometimes. Sumo's throat felt a little sore as he nodded. I understand. The two of them fell silent for a while. After eating some fish and drinking some wine, Suemo smiled and said, I won't settle for a man who thinks I'm too small. Wen Yuan was right. Suemo said, I want to go to Longxiong. Wen Yuan was speechless. Suemo said, I'm not ugly. There are a lot of people chasing after me from here to France. He didn't like me, so I slept with him and then kicked him away. Wen Yuan was also a little drunk. He held Sumo's arm and said, That's right, sleep with him. She rested her face on Sumo's arm. Remember to wear a t-shirt. Otherwise, it'll be bad if you get pregnant like me. I don't want to get married, she murmured. I have to get married. I still have to endure a man with a bad temper. I even have to let him strip me every day and play all kinds of mysterious games. He's too perverted. Suemo was not completely drunk. She could hold her liquor well because she was a girl from the north. She was dumbfounded. Then, she quickly took out her phone and set it to recording mode. Wen Yuan, what hobbies does Yi Mubai have? I want to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1. Husband, addicted to pampering. Talking about life and looking for confidence. Chapter 3950. Wen Yuan lay on his stomach and laughed like a little girl. After a long time, he spat out a few words. He likes to do it from behind especially, and he likes to grab my hair. I'm almost bald here. Sumo's heart was trembling. Wow, that was so exciting. She cleared her throat. How many times can your CEO Yi do it in a night? How many times? Wen Yuan shook his head. I haven't counted, but he is very perverted. He won't let me sleep. Once, he didn't stop from 2 to 6 in the morning. I'm so tired. Suemo, there's nothing good about marriage. It's over if you meet a pervert. Suemo sighed. You obviously enjoy it. She grabbed her hair. A well-fed man doesn't know the suffering of a starving man. Suemo made Wen Yuan drunk, and she didn't know what to do. She didn't expect Wen Yuan's alcohol tolerance to be so bad. Now, she could only call Yi Mubai and brace herself to say that Wen Yuan was drunk. In less than 5 minutes, her President Yi magically appeared. Suemo looked at him and stuttered, Su Yi, you are here. Yi Mubai stood and looked at his wife, who was drunk like mud. Suemo was fine. Sumo worked in public relations. Not to mention being able to drink 1,000 cups of wine, she could easily knock out 3 or 4 men. Wen Yuan was really a pig for drinking ergwota with her. Yi Mubai looked at Suemo and said calmly, I forgot to tell you that Kong Qiao is also in this restaurant, on the 3rd floor. Suemo was stunned. What a coincidence! After Yi Mubai finished speaking, he carried his wife in his arms. How embarrassing! How could she eat herself to such an extent while drinking hot pot? When he walked out, Suemo called out to him, By the way, Qiu Yi, I have a gift for you. I'll send you a message. He looked at her and snorted. It had better be to my satisfaction. Su Mo put on a fake smile and said ambiguously, "The nightclub will be satisfied." Yi Mubai walked out and carried Wen Yuan into the car. Then he received Su Mo's so-called gift. It was a voice message. He thought about it and opened it. Wen Yuan's voice came out along with Su Mo's voice. "He likes to do it from behind especially, and he likes to grab my hair. I'm almost bald. How many times can your Xiao Yi do it in one night? I haven't counted, but he's especially perverted. He won't let me sleep. Once, he didn't stop from 2 in the morning until 6 in the morning. I'm so tired. Su Mo, there's nothing good about marriage. If you meet a pervert, it's over. You clearly enjoy it." Yi Mubai listened a few times, then turned his head to look at the drunk cat beside him. He smiled faintly and started the car. When he returned home, he was in a good mood. He had already thought of a way to teach her a lesson. He would say that he liked to do it from behind. He remembered that she was the one who liked it the most when he tortured her from behind. She liked to do it to him. After Yi Mubai took Wen Yuan away, Su Mo sat alone. She did not leave immediately but chose to sit there and drink. She drank 4 bottles of ergotu and got herself drunk. Later, she vomited on the other side of the road. She lay there and vomited terribly. In fact, it was not the first time she did this. Many times, she had to drink a lot when dealing with clients. Once, she even slept on the street. When she woke up the next day, there were a few 10 yuan bills beside her. They were given by a few children who treated her like a homeless person. When she sat up, she smelled the stench on her body. She felt that she was no different from the roadside. This time, she only wanted to get drunk for herself. She wanted to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1. Husband, addicted to pampering. Talking about life and looking for bosom friends. Chapter 3951. When Kong Qiao was about to drive away, he suddenly saw a familiar figure. It was Su Mo. She was wearing the bourgeois clothes he saw today, which cost tens of thousands, but she was lying on the side of the road like a cat or dog. Kong Qiao stopped the car, jumped out, and walked straight to Su Mo. Su Mo was wearing a suit that cost tens of thousands of yuan. She climbed on the divider like a monkey and looked at him with a silly smile. She was really drunk, but she knew him. Kong Qiao looked at the traffic around and frowned. "Su Mo, come here." She refused and refused to get down. She shouted at him, "I'm very young. I won't meet a pervert on the road." Kong Qiao was helpless. "Come down, I'll take you home." Su Mo looked at him. "I'll go with you if you take me home." Kong Qiao thought for a moment and nodded. "Come down, I'll take you home." He reached out to pick her up. When Su Mo threw herself into his arms, she bit her lip. "I want to make love to you." Kong Qiao hugged her. At this moment, he was a little embarrassed. Then he scolded her. "Girls shouldn't say such things. You're not a good person." Su Mo put her arms around his neck. "I'll do anything to get what I want. Are you sure you still want to take me home?" Kong Qiao carried her all the way to the car. He wasn't alone in the car. There was a very decent woman in the car. Su Mo was drunk, but she also knew that it was a woman sitting in the passenger seat. She was so embarrassed that she wanted to get out of the car and drive back by herself. Kong Qiao fastened the seatbelt and said coldly, "Believe it or not, I'll really throw you out of here if you keep making trouble." Su Mo stopped and then looked at the woman in front of her. She felt that she was very beautiful and big from the side. She didn't say anything and lay in the back obediently. After a while, she muttered, "Don't you like Wen Yuan very much? Kong Qiao, you're such a hypocrite. Is she your sex friend?" After she finished speaking, the atmosphere in the car was quite strange. Kong Qiao could only apologize to the woman beside him. She drank too much. The woman didn't care much. "Just drop me off at the intersection. Kong Qiao, we'll talk about the specific cooperation next time." She smiled. "You may have some personal affairs to deal with now." Kong Qiao sighed. "Just a friend." "She likes you." The woman hit the nail on the head. Kong Qiao didn't say anything. She stopped the car in front of them and got out to send them off before getting back into the car. Su Mo had already fallen asleep in the back seat of his car. He frowned and wanted to ask her where she lived, but after thinking about it, he decided to let her stay for one night. He drove back to his apartment, which was located on the top floor of a certain apartment in the elite area of B City. It was about 200 square meters and very spacious for one person to live in. In fact, he was rarely in B City and spent most of his time flying around the world. Suemo had fallen asleep and was still holding onto her bag. He carried her out of the car and kicked the door shut. When they arrived at his apartment, he brought her to the guest room without hesitation. He thought that she would be well behaved, but as soon as she laid down, she tugged at her clothes and said that it was hot and that she wanted to take a bath. Kong Qiao's temper was considered good. He patiently filled the bathtub with hot water and carried her in. "Soak yourself for a while. Call me when you're done." Suemo sat on the floor and looked at him pitifully. "Aren't you going to help me take off my clothes?" When Yuan said that Yi Mubai likes to take off her clothes the most. "I want to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1. Husband, addicted to pampering. Talking about life and looking for confidence." Chapter 3952. Kong Qiao's eyes darkened, but he didn't leave immediately. Instead, he squatted down and looked into her eyes. "Suemo, don't try to provoke me. It's not good for a woman to flirt with a man." Suemo knelt on the ground and straightened her body. She grabbed his tie and pulled him in front of her. She leaned in and said, "You don't dare, do you? Kong Qiao, aren't you still a virgin?" He stared at her with a deep gaze. Suemo was still provoking him. "Do you know how it feels to be a woman?" She put his hand on her waist and let him hug her. "I have everything except for my breasts. Kong Qiao, do you want to try?" His Adam's apple moved slightly and he threw her into the bathtub. "You need to wake up." Suemo screamed in the water. "I don't know how to swim." He didn't want to talk to her, but in the end his heart softened. He turned around and glared at her. "Suemo, don't you have any shame?" She rushed out of the water, and Kong Qiao was stunned. Where were her clothes? Suemo slowly walked out of the bathtub and slowly walked to his side. Before he could react, she hugged his neck and kissed him. After a while, she moved to his Adam's apple and bit it. "I heard from Wen Yuan that your nude photos are I really want to see them." Kong Qiao was shocked and angry. "Suemo, are you still a woman? You can check." She was drunk and had been rejected. Anyway, there was nothing worse than this. Wen Yuan was right. It was good that she couldn't sleep with him. Moreover, a drunk Suemo was a hooligan. She touched everywhere. Kong Qiao grabbed her hand and put it behind her back. He said in a low voice, "Don't play with fire. Otherwise, you won't be able to bear it." Sumo's fingers slowly moved down, and under his gaze, it wasn't her first time. That man had left her when something happened to her family. At that time, Suemo had decided not to love any bastard anymore. However, she fell in love with Kong Qiao. It was probably because of his obsession with Wen Yuan. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that they were like lightning and fire. Kong Qiao was not gentle. When it came to such matters, he gave off a completely different vibe than usual. He was forceful and even rough. He threw her onto the soft bed and did it again and again. That night, Suemo begged for mercy until her voice was hoarse, but he still didn't let her go. By the time it was over, it was already 2 in the morning. He leaned against the bed and smoked. Suemo moved a little under the blanket, and he lowered his gaze. "Are you sober now?" Suemo pulled up the blanket and looked at it. "What Wen Yuan said is true." Kong Qiao put out the cigarette and said calmly, "I won't take responsibility." Although Suemo had already known that she would only sleep with him once, she still felt a little hurt when she heard this. She forced a smile and said, "I know, I was the one who took the initiative." At that time, she had been so proactive. Only a man would be able to hold himself back. She knew that she was not ugly. Although her figure was flat, she was still somewhat seductive because she was thin. Kong Qiao looked at her silently for a moment and suddenly said, "Don't worry about getting pregnant. I've taken precautions." Sumo's face was burning as though she had been slapped. She lowered her gaze. "Are you afraid that I'll cling to you?" "No, I just don't want to lose another innocent life before I think it through." Just for a night of pleasure, he said calmly before lifting the blanket and getting up. He put on his trousers and was about to return to his bedroom. Let's leave at daybreak. I want to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1, hubby, addicted to pampering. Talking about life and looking for bosom friends. Chapter 3953. He had only taken a few steps when Sumo immediately got off the bed and hugged him from behind. She shamelessly used the humblest tone she had ever used in her life and let go of all her pride. Is it really impossible between us? He did not turn around and only said, I have a condom here. Sumo, you're an adult, so you should understand that I'm not a pure man. I have a woman. It was just a special woman. He might call her once a month, and she was of a higher class. Sumo's grip loosened and she was stunned. She had not expected such an answer. She had always thought that a man like Kong Qiao would be especially clean. Hadn't he always been waiting for Wen Yuan? He turned around. I do like Wen Yuan, but she's already someone else's wife. I won't have any improper thoughts. So, you've always had women and the kind that you bought with money? Sumo felt as if she had swallowed a fly and was disgusted. He nodded before looking at her. I told you a long time ago that it's not good to play around with men. Sumo, I'm not the perfect man you think I am, and I'm not Prince Charming either. I'm just an ordinary man with lust, and I'll be able to differentiate between flesh and soul. He paused. If you feel that I'm suitable, you can come to me again. Sumo was disgusted. She covered the blanket in front of her and said with a trembling voice, Did you plan to spend the night with the woman in the car today? No, he replied quickly. But I've had sex with her twice. Sumo, you're also in the entertainment industry. Isn't this normal? We take what we need and get together because of benefits. Once the benefits are over, we separate. Sumo laughed. She took a lighter from the bed and lit up another cigarette. She took a deep puff and said, So Wen Yuan is the white moonlight in your heart. She's very clean, so you want to marry her. Kong Qiao, do you think you're worthy of Wen Yuan when you're so dirty? You've slept with so many women, and perhaps many of them are old women. Sumo's hand that was holding the cigarette was trembling and her voice was almost hysterical. You don't deserve to like Wen Yuan at all. You still want her to pursue her dream and sleep with anyone like you? Kong Qiao looked at her calmly. Sumo, have you ever sold your own body? Sumo stared at him and took a few more drags of the cigarette. Then she pressed the cigarette butt out. She got off the bed and walked straight to him. She raised her hand and slapped him in the face. Then, tears welled up in her eyes. I only sell my skills, not my body. Kong Qiao, you listen to me. Tonight I've been a prostitute, you name your price? He didn't say anything. She took out a checkbook from her bag and wrote a few numbers on it. 1 million. You're worth this much. She threw it to him and took 2 steps back. Her eyes were bloodshot. She felt that he was even worse than her first love. That man just didn't want to take it. On the other hand, Kong Qiao slept with so many people in order to become famous and gain what he needed. She knew too well what kind of people slept with him when they just entered the circle. She had always thought that Kong Qiao was clean. As it turned out, he was already so dirty that he could not be seen. Sumo didn't cry. She just felt disgusted. She was bitten by a dog, and she was the one who took the initiative. She went to the bathroom and took her clothes out of the water. She put them on while they were wet. She rushed out of his bedroom with her bag. She had to leave in the middle of the night. She couldn't stay with such a man, not even for a minute. She wanted to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1, hubby, addicted to pampering. On WeChat, she followed Yudu literature. Talking about life, looking for bosom friends. Chapter 3954. When she reached the door, her arm was caught and she was brought into a firm embrace. He lowered his head and looked at her with a contorted face. You've seen the true side of me. Are you disgusted? His fingers caressed her face gently as he said hoarsely, Weren't you satisfied with my performance when you moaned so happily earlier on? Sumo looked at him and patted him. Let go of me, Kong Qiao. Let go of me. At this moment, she was a little afraid. She felt as though she had seen a demon. Kong Qiao was not like this, and she did not want to listen anymore because it was too disgusting. He held her down easily with one arm as he leaned over and said in a low voice, "You're disgusting. You've slept with me too, Suemo. I've already said that you should stay away from me. A man like me will never give in unless I'm willing. Then, you can just wait to be slept with by old women one after another." She roared at him, her voice almost tearing her heart out. The next second she was thrown onto the bed. Kong Qiao stood by the bed and looked at her coldly. "It's not what you think it is. Are you angry from embarrassment? Suemo, I'm very expensive. I'm not interested in 1,000,000. In front of her, he tore the check into shreds and said in a cold voice, "Don't worry, I won't touch you again. I don't lack women, and I'm not the kind of person you think I am. Suemo, we've never interacted before, and you're not a child anymore. Isn't this kind of love between a man and a woman supposed to be consensual?" Suemo bit her lips and looked at his expressionless face. This Kong Qiao was the real Kong Qiao, a top-notch celebrity who had been in the entertainment industry for many years. Suddenly she laughed. That's right, she was really silly. Other than someone with a family background like Yi Mubai's, how could anyone else leave with a clean conscience? It was impossible to obtain a Vanity Fair like this without paying a price. She smiled at him and did not say anything, but tears flowed down from the corner of her eyes. She was still a little upset, but she did not know what she was upset about. Actually, Kong Qiao was right. The industry was like this. It was normal for him to pursue fame and fortune. It was her brain that short-circuited. She had forgotten what Yi Mubai had said to her. He had said, "Don't look for a man from the entertainment industry." Suemo wiped his tears and said, "Kong Qiao, don't worry. Today's matter ends here. I won't slander you. You can still be the prince of the violin, but don't hang around when you on anymore. You really don't deserve her. Yi Mubai is the most suitable person for her." "Because of his background?" Kong Qiao asked coldly. Suemo smiled. "That's right, some things are destined by the heavens. There's nothing we can do about it." Just like herself, her family background was not something that she could choose for herself. However, she did not sell her body and only slept with the men she liked. Kong Qiao was her second man. It was disgusting. She undressed, went to the bathroom to shower, and climbed under the covers when she returned. After a while, the voice said, "Thank you for taking me in. I will leave tomorrow morning." Concho stood at the foot of the bed, frowning. Suemo did not say anything else. He just lay there quietly. He stood there for a while before returning to his bedroom. After returning to his bedroom and lying on the bed, Kong Qiao's emotions could not calm down for a long time. Today, he had lost his composure. He could have not told Suemo these things that no one knew about. These were the secrets of the entertainment industry, but he did not expect Suemo to be so different. Chapter 3955. Every time she looked at him, it was as if she was looking at a saint. Kong Qiao knew exactly what she thought of him. He found it a little ridiculous. He had never been in love with her because she wasn't his type and she couldn't afford to play around. However, when she hugged the fence and told him that she wanted to go home with him, he was tempted. The little devil in his heart wanted to tear away the layer of hope in her heart. He wanted to see how she would react after knowing what kind of person he was. It would be interesting. In the end, she cried. Actually, it was quite good. She wouldn't look at him like that anymore. It was annoying. He had never been a perfect person. She didn't have to be like that. The feeling of tearing her little heart apart with his own hands was subtle and satisfying. Of course, her body was unexpectedly soft and immature. She probably hadn't had a man for a long time. When he first took her, she was in pain. Her subtle expression couldn't fool him. Kong Qiao hid a strange feeling in his heart. He convinced himself that it was the first time he met such a stupid woman who thought the world was so beautiful. He sneered and closed his eyes to sleep. At dawn, Kong Qiao got up. He felt that something was missing in the air. He got up and went to the guest room. Suemo was no longer there. She still wore those wet clothes and left, taking everything here with her, including the t-shirt he had used. This was the first time a woman was willing to clean up the battlefield, but he had an indescribable feeling. He guessed that she didn't want to leave any traces. She didn't want to admit that they had done it. That was it. He stood there quietly, watching her leave, fleeing in panic. He was very dirty. Other than Wen Yuan, who was the white moon in his heart, he could only watch from afar. And now, he didn't want to touch Su Mo. If sleeping with her once could make her smart enough to run far away. He went back to the bedroom to sleep. However, he couldn't fall asleep after lying on the bed. The moment he closed his eyes, he thought of Su Mo lying under him. She wasn't the most beautiful, but she was especially seductive when she took the initiative. That was why he came again and again last night. However, there wouldn't be a next time. Kong Qiao was a man who followed the rules of the game. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to survive in this circle. Unable to fall asleep, he simply sat up, lit a cigarette, and smoked quietly. In the master bedroom on the second floor of the villa. Yi Mubai had woken up a long time ago and had been staring at his wife. When Yuan was still asleep, he reached out and gently scratched her face. She still didn't wake up. Instead, she turned over and curled up in his arms, wrapping one arm around his neck. When Yuan. He leaned over and nibbled on her ear. When Yuan was woken up by him. She had a bad temper recently, so she bit the tip of his nose hard and accidentally tore it. Yi Mubai felt the pain and reached out to grab her hair and pull her back. Wen Yuan, you're a puppy. She was still sleepy, so she buried her face in his chest and pressed her warm lips against his chest, causing Yi Mubai's blood to boil. He grabbed her and refused to let her bury her face in his chest. When at him. She wanted to at him. At him sick. She had to say at him as he wanted to say. When as she had at as she wanted. At her at Wen Yuan. And she wanted to get her. Chapter 3956. When Yuan was fully awake. She looked at the place where she had bitten. It was red and swollen. She bit her lip and coughed. Who told you to wake me up so early in the morning? He was still staring at her. You heard it. She looked at him, speechless, and then stared at him and what do you want? Yi Mubai gently grabbed her hair and moved it closer. I want it to stop hurting. When Yuan's face was buried there. She screamed, Yi Mubai, you are a pervert. He laughed in a low voice, very happy, and pulled her head to look at him again. Do you dare to do this again? She didn't say anything, but buried her face in his mouth and let him nibble on it. It was a kind of healing. He felt a little itchy and his voice almost trembled. Wen Yuan. I don't like it anymore. She smiled naughtily, hugging his neck with her arms, and said in a coquettish voice. He lowered his head, stared at her, and then pressed her down. He kissed her hard for a long time, and then said breathlessly, You're killing me. Go on. When Yuan murmured, I thought you didn't like it. He closed his eyes to enjoy it, and his voice was vague, all men like it. He made a sound as if he was in pain. When Yuan couldn't go on anymore. She leaned over and said warmly, Yi Mubai, you're even more promiscuous than a woman. He opened his eyes and stared at her for a while. Then he took the phone from the bedside, turned the volume to the maximum, and played a conversation. He likes to do it from behind, especially, and he likes to grab my hair. I'm almost bald here. How many times can he do it in one night? I haven't counted, but he is very perverted. He doesn't let me sleep. Once, he didn't stop from 2 o'clock to 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm so tired, Su Mo. Before she finished playing, Wen Yuan grabbed the phone and hung up. She blushed and gritted her teeth. You are so hateful. Mr. Yi looked at her lazily. Isn't it Su Mo who told me? Why don't you talk about her? When Yuan thought of Su Mo and hurriedly asked, How did she get back yesterday? She can hold her liquor very well, unless she wants to get drunk. But last night, Kong Qiao was also in that shop. You didn't see him? As Yi Mubai spoke, he began to work neatly. He whispered into her ear, Be quiet later. Don't moan so recklessly, okay? Her face was red and her heart was beating fast. She pushed him. "I'm talking to you about something serious." He chuckled, hugged her from behind, and bit her ear. "Is this your favorite?" Wen Yuan's face was so red that it was about to bleed. He reached out his hand and said, "Yi Mubai, don't be like this. Didn't you say I liked it the most?" He leaned against her back and sprinkled a string of small kisses on her shoulders, teasing her until she begged for mercy like a little kitten. He admired her anxious look, but he still did not let her go. "You said I like to grab your hair." "Wen Yuan, my hair is going bald because of you. Do you want to see?" She said no, praised him with all her might, and told him all the things that he loved to hear. Yi Mubai was still laughing in a low voice, torturing her to death. After that, Wen Yuan soaked in the bathtub and scolded Su Mo in his heart. Then he gritted his teeth and thought that she had served him so well just now, and he didn't let her go. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.